The candles had barely been lit when Alina Whitmore felt a hand close around her wrist and pull her out of the shadows. "Smile," Margaret hissed into her ear, her grip tight enough to bruise. "Smile, or I promise you will regret coming here tonight." Alina's heart slammed against her chest. Around her, the ballroom of Ashcombe Hall glittered with gold light and moving silk, but none of it felt real. What felt real was the fear crawling up her spine, and the sound of her cousin's voice, sharp as a blade hidden under lace gloves. "I did not want to come," Alina whispered back. "You know that Aunt Constance forced me. And now you will do exactly as you are told, or every person in this room will know exactly what you are." Margaret's smile did not reach her eyes. She turned Alina by the shoulders so that the crowd could see her plain gray dress, mended twice at the hem, standing out like a bruise against the sea of jewels and silk around them. A ripple of laughter passed through a cluster of young ladies nearby. Alina felt her face burn. She had known, from the moment the carriage rolled up to the grand iron gates of Ashcombe Hall, that tonight would not be kind to her. She had known it when Aunt Constance handed her the invitation with 2 fingers as though it were something dirty and said, "You will attend, and you will remember your place." She had known it when Margaret laughed at her dress before they had even left the house. What she had not known, what she could not have known, was that within the hour her entire life would change in front of 300 strangers. "Everyone," Margaret announced, raising her voice so that heads turned across the ballroom, "I would like you to meet my cousin, Alina. She has always claimed in private that she can sing better than any performer at the Opera House in London." Margaret's eyes glittered with cruel delight. "I thought it was time she proved it." A murmur ran through the crowd. Somewhere glasses clinked, somewhere else a fan snapped shut. Alina's stomach dropped through the polished marble floor. "I never said such a thing," she said quietly, but her voice was lost beneath the swelling whispers of the crowd, who had already begun to gather closer, drawn by the promise of entertainment at someone else's expense. "Do not be modest now," Margaret said loudly, taking Alina's arm and steering her toward the small raised platform where the orchestra had just finished a piece. "Show them." Alina tried to pull away, but Margaret's grip was iron, and the crowd had already closed in around them, curious faces pressing close, some amused, some pitying, none of them kind. "Please," Alina whispered, "do not do this." "You embarrassed me in front of Lord Pembroke last spring," Margaret said, low and venomous, for Alina's ears only. "You will pay that debt tonight." Before Alina could protest again, she felt herself pushed forward, stumbling onto the small platform where the musicians sat with their instruments lowered, watching her with open curiosity. The chatter of the ballroom rolled toward her like a wave, and for one terrible moment, Alina thought she might simply turn and run, gray dress and all, out into the night and never look back. But then she saw him. Near the front of the crowd, seated in a tall chair upholstered in deep blue velvet, sat a man Alina had not noticed before. He was young, perhaps 30, with dark hair swept back from a strong, serious face, and eyes that were watching her not with mockery, but with something closer to quiet interest. He wore no elaborate decoration, no sash of rank, yet everyone around him seemed to lean slightly in his direction, as though his presence bent the room like gravity. Alina did not need anyone to tell her who he was. This was the Duke of Ashcombe. This was his home, his ball, his world, and she had just been shoved into the center of it like a lamb pushed toward wolves. "Well," Margaret called out from the crowd, her voice sweet with false encouragement, "we are all waiting, cousin." Laughter rippled again, quieter this time, expectant. Somewhere in the crowd, a young man muttered something to his companion, and the companion snickered. Alina felt every eye in the room settle on her at once, heavy as stones. Her mind raced. She could refuse. She could turn and walk away, accept whatever cruelty Margaret dealt her later, accept being called a coward and a liar for the rest of her life in that household. Or she could stand here, in her mended dress, in front of the Duke of Ashcombe and everyone who mattered in the county, and open her mouth, not knowing what would come out. She thought of her mother. The thought arrived unbidden, sharp and sudden, and it steadied something inside her. Her mother, Lillian, had once stood on stages far grander than this small platform, her voice filling concert halls before poverty and illness had silenced her forever. Alina had been only a girl when she used to sit at her mother's feet in their old house, before everything was lost, listening to her sing softly by the fire. Her mother had told her once, in a voice already growing weak, "Never let anyone make you feel small for the gift inside you, Alina. A voice like ours is not given to be hidden." Alina closed her eyes. The ballroom held its breath. And then she began to sing. It was not the delicate parlor tune the crowd expected, not some safe little melody meant to please and be forgotten. It was the song her mother used to sing on the nights when the fire burned low and hope burned lower, a song about loss, about love that outlasts everything, about a heart that refuses to break no matter how many times the world tries to shatter it. Alina's voice, thin and trembling at first, grew steadier with each note, rising clear and pure through the vast ballroom, filling every corner of gilded ceiling and marble floor. The laughter died. The whispers stopped. Somewhere behind her, a violinist lowered his bow slowly, as though afraid to break whatever was happening. Fans stopped moving. Glasses stopped clinking. 300 people who, moments before, had been ready to enjoy Alina's humiliation, stood frozen, listening to a voice that did not belong in a mendied gray dress in the corner of a ballroom. It belonged somewhere far greater. Alina did not open her eyes. She could not have said in that moment whether she was singing for the crowd, for Margaret's cruelty, or simply for the memory of her mother's voice guiding her own. The song swelled, aching and beautiful, and when she reached the final note, she let it hang in the air for a long moment before letting it fade into silence. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. It was heavy, complete, and utterly still. Then, from near the front of the crowd, a single sound broke the quiet. Someone was rising to their feet. Alina opened her eyes and found herself looking directly into the face of the Duke of Ashcombe, who had stood from his velvet chair, his dark eyes fixed on her with an expression she could not name, something between astonishment and disbelief. For one endless heartbeat, no one else moved. Then he began to applaud. The sound cracked through the silence like a thunderclap, and a moment later the rest of the room followed, first hesitantly, then in a great wave of clapping and murmured astonishment. Alina stood frozen on the platform, her cheeks burning, her hands trembling at her sides, as the very people who had gathered to watch her fail now stared at her as though she were something extraordinary. Margaret's face, when Alina finally found it in the crowd, had gone the color of ash. The Duke was walking toward the platform now, unhurried, his eyes never leaving Alina's face. The crowd parted for him instinctively, the way water parts for a ship, and Alina felt her pulse quicken with something that was no longer only fear. "Who," he asked, his voice low but carrying easily in the hush that had fallen over the room, "taught you to sing like that?" Alina opened her mouth to answer, but no words came. She was aware, suddenly, of how close he stood, of how the entire ballroom seemed to be holding its breath again, waiting to see what would happen next between the Duke of Ashcombe and the girl in the mendied gray dress. She had come to this ball expecting humiliation. She had never imagined this. And somewhere in the crowd, Margaret's mother, Aunt Constance, watched with narrowed eyes, already calculating how quickly this unexpected turn could be twisted back into her favor. The night, Alina realized with a shiver of unease beneath her triumph, was far from over. It was, in fact, only just beginning. The Duke's question hung in the air between them, gentle but insistent, and every guest in the ballroom leaned in, straining to hear how Alina Whitmore, the poor cousin in the mendied dress, would answer the most powerful man in the county. Alina swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze steadily, though her knees felt unsteady beneath her skirts. "My mother taught me, Your Grace," she said finally, her voice quiet but clear enough to carry. "She was a singer before she became too ill to perform. She passed when I was 14. A murmur moved through the crowd again, softer this time, touched with something like sympathy. The Duke studied her for a long moment, as though weighing her words against some private measure only he understood. "Then your mother," he said slowly, "gave the world something rare, and she gave it twice, once through her own voice and once through yours." Alina felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from shame this time, but from something else entirely, something she did not yet have a name for. Around them the guests began to whisper again, but the tone had shifted completely. No longer mocking, no longer cruel. Now it was curiosity, admiration, even envy, and Alina could feel Margaret's fury radiating from somewhere behind her like heat from a fire. The Duke extended his hand toward her, palm up, an invitation rather than a command. "Would you do me the honor of the next dance, Miss Whitmore?" The ballroom seemed to hold its breath collectively. Alina looked down at his outstretched hand, then up at his face, searching for any trace of mockery, any hint that this was simply another cruel game at her expense. She found none, only quiet sincerity and something else beneath it that she could not yet interpret. Slowly she placed her hand in his. The moment their fingers touched, a fresh wave of whispers swept across the ballroom, and Alina knew, with sudden and absolute certainty, that nothing about her life would ever be quite the same again. As the orchestra began a new melody and the Duke led her onto the dance floor, past faces frozen in astonishment, Alina caught one final glimpse of Margaret, standing rigid and pale near the refreshment table, her carefully constructed plan for humiliation lying in ruins around her polished shoes. But even as triumph warmed Alina's chest, a small, cautious voice inside her whispered a warning. Margaret would not forgive this. Aunt Constance would not forget it. And whatever had just begun between herself and the Duke of Ashcombe in front of 300 witnesses was only the first step onto ground far more dangerous than any ballroom floor. Alina Whitmore held her chin high as the music swelled around them, and let herself, just for tonight, believe that something wonderful had finally found her. The dance carried them across the polished floor, past mirrors that multiplied the candlelight 1,000 times over, past guests who no longer bothered to hide their staring. Alina had never danced with anyone of such rank before, and she was certain her steps must look clumsy compared to the practiced grace of the ladies who usually filled this ballroom. Yet the Duke held her with a steadiness that made her feel, for the first time all evening, that she was not something to be mocked or dismissed. "You dance as though you expect the floor to disappear beneath you," he said, a faint smile touching the corner of his mouth. "Forgive me, Your Grace," Alina answered. "I have not had much occasion to practice such things." "There is nothing to forgive. I find honesty a rare enough quality in this room that I am inclined to treasure it wherever I find it." His dark eyes studied her face for a moment longer than propriety strictly allowed. "Tell me, Miss Whitmore, were you truly forced onto that stage tonight?" Alina hesitated. To answer honestly would mean exposing Margaret's cruelty in front of the very society that judged such things harshly, and yet lying to this man, after everything that had already happened, felt impossible. "I was, Your Grace," she admitted quietly. "My cousin believed it would embarrass me." Something shifted in the Duke's expression. A flicker of quiet anger quickly smoothed away beneath practiced composure. "Then your cousin gravely misjudged the outcome," he said. "I suspect she did not anticipate what your voice would do to this room." Alina allowed herself the smallest smile. "Neither did I, if I am honest." The dance ended too soon, and as the final notes faded, the Duke did not immediately release her hand. Instead, he guided her gently toward the edge of the floor, away from the densest cluster of onlookers, though there was no true escape from the many eyes still following their every movement. "I would like to speak with you further, Miss Whitmore, if you are willing," he said. "Perhaps somewhere with fewer ears listening." Alina glanced around the ballroom, at the sea of faces still watching, whispering, calculating. Somewhere among them, she knew, Margaret and Aunt Constance were already plotting how to reclaim control of a night that had slipped entirely from their grasp. A cautious voice inside Alina urged restraint, reminded her of how quickly fortunes could turn, how easily kindness from a powerful man could become another kind of trap. But another voice, quieter and more stubborn, remembered her mother's words by the fireside, remembered years of being told she was too plain, too poor, too unimportant to matter. That voice wanted desperately to see where this unexpected night might lead. "I am willing, Your Grace," Alina said finally. As the Duke led her toward a quieter corner near the tall windows overlooking the moonlit gardens, Alina did not see the sharp, calculating look that passed between Margaret and her mother across the crowded room, nor the small, deliberate nod Aunt Constance gave in response. She did not yet know that even as her own fortune seemed to be turning, forces were already gathering to make certain it would not turn easily or without a fight. For now, standing beside a man whose attention alone could reshape her entire future, Alina allowed herself one quiet, fragile moment of hope, unaware of how fiercely that hope would soon be tested. The tall windows of the East Gallery looked out over gardens silvered by moonlight, and for a moment neither Alina nor the Duke spoke, the noise of the ballroom fading into a distant hum behind them. She was acutely aware of her worn gloves, of the small tear near her left sleeve that she had mended so carefully that morning, hoping no one would notice. Standing beside him now, close enough to see the fine stitching of his coat, she felt the gap between their worlds more sharply than ever. "You seem troubled," the Duke said quietly, breaking the silence. "I hope I have not made you uncomfortable." "No, Your Grace," Alina said quickly. "It is only that I am unused to such attention. An hour ago I was invisible in this house. Now I feel as though every eye in the county is upon me." "Every eye in the county was upon you the moment you opened your mouth to sing," he replied. "I merely happened to be close enough to see it first." Alina allowed herself a small, surprised laugh, and something in the Duke's expression softened at the sound of it, as though he had been waiting to hear it. "May I ask you something personal, Miss Whitmore?" "You may ask, Your Grace. I cannot promise a graceful answer." "Why does your cousin dislike you so intensely?" "I have watched enough society games in my life to recognize genuine cruelty when I see it, and what happened on that stage tonight was not a harmless jest." Alina hesitated, glancing toward the ballroom where, even from this distance, she could see Margaret's pale blue gown moving through the crowd like a blade searching for an opening. She chose her words carefully. "My father was a merchant, Your Grace. A successful one once. When he died, his business failed within the year, and what little money remained went to settling his debts. My mother and I were left with almost nothing. Aunt Constance took us in out of duty, not affection, and Margaret has never forgiven me for existing in her household as a reminder of how quickly fortune can turn against a family." The Duke's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That is a poor reason to treat anyone with cruelty." "Perhaps," Alina said, "but it is the truth of it." He studied her for a long moment, and Alina found herself unable to look away from the intensity in his dark eyes. "Your honesty is rare, Miss Whitmore. Most people in this house tell me only what they believe I wish to hear." "I have very little practice in flattery, Your Grace. Poverty leaves little room for it." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Then I hope you will forgive me if I find your company considerably more interesting than anyone else's tonight." Before Alina could respond, a shadow fell across them, and she turned to find a tall, elegantly dressed gentleman approaching, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes moved quickly between Alina and the Duke with obvious curiosity. "Edmund," the newcomer said, addressing the Duke with the easy familiarity of long friendship, "your guests are asking after you. Lady Pemberton in particular seems quite determined to secure your attention before the night is through." "Lady Pemberton can wait, Frederick," the Duke replied, though not unkindly. "Allow me to introduce Miss Alina Whitmore. Miss Whitmore, this is Lord Frederick Ainsworth, an old friend, and occasionally an unwelcome interruption." Frederick bowed politely, though his gaze lingered on Alina with evident interest. "Miss Whitmore, I confess I have never seen this room fall so completely silent as it did during your performance. It was remarkable." "You are very kind, my lord," Alina said, though she could sense something guarded beneath his polite manner, an assessment happening behind his pleasant expression. "Kindness has nothing to do with it," Frederick said. "I simply speak the truth as I saw it." He turned back to the Duke, his tone shifting slightly, becoming more pointed. "Edmund, might I have a word, privately?" The Duke glanced at Alina, something apologetic in his expression. "Will you excuse me a moment, Miss Whitmore?" "Of course, Your Grace." As the two men withdrew a short distance, speaking in low, urgent tones, Alina remained near the window, watching moonlight ripple across the garden fountain below. She could not hear their conversation clearly, but she caught fragments carried on the night air. "Know nothing of her family beyond what she has told you herself," Frederick was saying. "I know enough," the Duke replied, his voice low but firm. "Edmund, be reasonable. An hour ago you did not know this woman existed. Now you dance with her before the entire county, and I fear what conclusions people will draw and how quickly her cousin's family will move to exploit them." Alina's stomach tightened. She had not considered how her sudden, unexpected connection to the Duke might appear to others, how quickly admiration could curdle into suspicion, how easily she might be recast from unfortunate victim to calculating opportunist in the eyes of society. She thought of Margaret's earlier cruelty, and understood, with sudden clarity, that whatever had happened tonight was far from settled. If anything, it had only opened a new and more dangerous chapter. The Duke returned to her side a few minutes later, his expression carefully composed, though Alina could see traces of the tension from his conversation with Frederick still lingering in the set of his shoulders. "Forgive the interruption," he said. "Frederick worries on my behalf more than is strictly necessary." "He is not wrong to worry, Your Grace," Alina said quietly. "I understand how this must appear. A poor relation, singing unexpectedly at a grand ball, suddenly receiving the attention of the Duke himself. It would be foolish of me to pretend such attention comes without consequence." The Duke regarded her with something like respect. "You are remarkably clear-eyed for someone who, an hour ago, was being publicly humiliated by her own family. Clear-eyed is often the only advantage available to those with little else, Your Grace." He was quiet for a moment, studying her face as though committing it carefully to memory. "I would like to help you, Miss Whitmore, if you will permit it. Not out of pity, but because I believe a voice like yours deserves more than to be hidden away in a household that treats you as an inconvenience." Alina felt her pulse quicken, hope and caution warring within her in equal measure. "What sort of help do you mean, Your Grace?" "There are proper channels for cultivating a talent such as yours, music instructors, opportunities to perform for audiences who would appreciate what I heard tonight, rather than seeking to exploit it for cruel entertainment. I have connections in London who owe me favors, people who could open doors that would otherwise remain forever closed to someone in your circumstances." The offer hung in the air between them, glittering and dangerous, like something too good to be entirely safe. Alina thought of her mother, of the singing career cut short by illness and poverty, of all the years spent believing that such dreams belonged to other people, people born into better circumstances than her own. "Why would you do this for me, Your Grace?" she asked finally. "You know nothing of me beyond a single song." "Perhaps," the Duke admitted, "but I have attended countless balls in this house, Miss Whitmore, and heard countless performances by trained singers who spent years perfecting their craft. None of them moved this room the way you did tonight, without preparation, without expectation, simply by opening your heart alongside your voice. That is not something that can be taught. It can only be recognized, and I would be a poor steward of my own fortune if I recognized such a gift and did nothing to nurture it." Alina studied his face, searching for any hint of deception, any trace of the cruelty she had grown so accustomed to expecting from those with power over her circumstances. She found none, only quiet sincerity that both comforted and unsettled her in equal measure. "I would need to consider your offer carefully, Your Grace," she said finally. "My aunt controls my circumstances a great deal, and Margaret will not accept this development gracefully." "Then consider it," the Duke said. "There is no urgency to decide tonight. But know that the offer remains open, regardless of what obstacles your family may attempt to place before you." Across the ballroom, unnoticed by either of them, Margaret watched the quiet exchange near the window with narrowed eyes, her earlier fury cooling into something colder and more calculating. Beside her, Aunt Constance leaned close, whispering urgently. "This cannot be allowed to continue," Aunt Constance murmured. "If the Duke takes an interest in that girl, it will ruin every prospect we have arranged for you, Margaret. We must act quickly, before this foolishness takes deeper root." "What do you suggest, Mother?" Margaret asked, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. Aunt Constance's eyes glittered with cold calculation as she watched Alina and the Duke continue their quiet conversation by the window. "We remind the Duke, and everyone else in this room, exactly what kind of family Alina Whitmore truly comes from. A little truth, carefully arranged, can do far more damage than any lie." Margaret's lips curved into a small, satisfied smile, the first genuine pleasure she had felt since her carefully constructed humiliation had collapsed into unexpected triumph for her cousin. "And what truth did you have in mind, Mother?" Aunt Constance's smile matched her daughter's, sharp and merciless. "Patience, my dear. All good schemes require proper timing. Tonight has already given us more opportunity than we could have hoped, though not in the way we intended. We simply need to redirect it." As the orchestra began a new melody and other guests returned to the dance floor, neither Alina nor the Duke noticed the two women retreating toward a quiet alcove, already deep in whispered conspiracy, already laying the foundation for whatever cruelty would come next. The ball continued around them, glittering and oblivious, while beneath its polished surface, the true battle for Alina's future had only just begun. Later that evening, as carriages began departing and the crowd slowly thinned, the Duke insisted on personally escorting Alina, along with her aunt and cousin, to their waiting carriage. Margaret's smile throughout the farewell was so convincingly warm that Alina felt a chill of unease settle in her stomach, recognizing the practiced falseness beneath her cousin's pleasant expression. "What a remarkable evening," Margaret said sweetly as they settled into the carriage, the Duke's tall figure receding into the distance behind them as the horses began to move. "I am so pleased my little challenge turned out so favorably for you, cousin." Alina said nothing, watching the dark countryside slide past the carriage window, her mind still full of the Duke's offer, of the strange, fragile hope blooming in her chest despite every instinct warning her to be cautious. "Do not grow too comfortable with his attention, Alina," Aunt Constance said quietly, her voice carrying an edge that made Alina's skin prickle with apprehension. "Men like the Duke of Ashcombe are easily charmed by novelty, but novelty fades quickly. And there are things about our family, about your mother's history, that would not survive close scrutiny should certain details come to light." Alina turned sharply toward her aunt, a cold weight settling in her stomach. "What do you mean?" But Aunt Constance only smiled, a thin, satisfied expression that revealed nothing and promised everything, and turned to look out her own window, leaving Alina to sit in tense, uneasy silence for the remainder of the long ride home, wondering exactly what secrets her aunt intended to use against her, and how much of her fragile new hope might be destroyed before she ever had the chance to see it fully bloom. Alina did not sleep that night. She lay awake in her small room at the top of the house, listening to the wind move through the bare branches outside her window, turning her aunt's cryptic warning over and over in her mind. What secrets could there be about her mother that had not already been picked apart and judged by the household years ago? She had grown up hearing whispered comments about her father's failed business, about the shame of poverty, about how far the family had fallen. What worse thing could Aunt Constance possibly hold in reserve? By morning, exhaustion had settled into her bones, but there was no rest to be found. She rose before dawn, as she always did, to begin the household tasks that Aunt Constance considered appropriate payment for Alina's continued shelter beneath her roof. She had barely finished lighting the kitchen fire when Margaret appeared in the doorway, still in her dressing gown, her expression carrying none of the false warmth from the previous night. "You should enjoy this morning," Margaret said, leaning against the doorframe with deceptive casualness. "It may be the last pleasant one you have for quite some time." "What did your mother mean last night, Margaret?" Alina asked, setting down the kettle. "What secret does she intend to use against me?" Margaret's smile was thin and satisfied. "That is not for me to say. Mother prefers to choose her own timing for such things, but I will tell you this, cousin. You should not grow too attached to whatever fantasy the Duke's attention has planted in your head. Men like him do not marry girls like you. They amuse themselves for a season, and then they marry someone suitable, someone with connections and fortune to match their own. You would do well to remember your place before you embarrass yourself further." Alina said nothing, though her hands trembled slightly as she returned to her work. She had learned long ago that arguing with Margaret only sharpened her cousin's cruelty, and she needed her strength for whatever the day might bring. She did not have to wait long to find out. Just past midday, a carriage arrived bearing the Duke's crest, and a liveried servant delivered a formal note addressed to Alina, requesting the pleasure of her company for tea at Ashcombe Hall the following afternoon, with her aunt's permission, of course, to discuss matters of musical instruction. Aunt Constance read the note twice before handing it to Alina with an expression Alina could not quite interpret, somewhere between calculation and reluctant permission. "You will go," Aunt Constance said finally. "It would be unwise to refuse a Duke's invitation, and foolish to waste whatever advantage last night's spectacle has provided our family. But understand this clearly, Alina. Whatever comes of this arrangement, you will not forget who provided you shelter these past 3 years, nor will you forget your obligations to this household." "I understand, Aunt," Alina said quietly, though something in her aunt's tone left her uneasy rather than reassured. The following afternoon, Alina arrived at Ashcombe Hall in her best dress, a simple pale blue gown that had once belonged to her mother, carefully preserved and altered to fit. She was shown into a bright, elegant sitting room where the Duke rose from his chair to greet her personally, his expression brightening in a way that eased some of the tension knotted in her chest. "Miss Whitmore, I am glad you accepted my invitation." "Thank you for extending it, Your Grace." They settled into comfortable chairs near a tall window overlooking the same gardens Alina had glimpsed the night of the ball, now bathed in soft afternoon light rather than moonlight. A servant brought tea, and for a while their conversation remained pleasant and unhurried, touching on music, on Alina's memories of her mother's singing, on the Duke's own modest skill at the pianoforte, which he insisted was far less impressive than he wished it to be. "I have written to an acquaintance in London," the Duke said eventually, setting down his teacup. "A woman named Margaret Ellison, no relation to your cousin, I should clarify, who trained several singers now performing at the finest concert halls in the city. She has agreed, as a favor to me, to hear you sing and offer her honest assessment of your abilities." Alina's heart quickened. "You have already arranged this, Your Grace, so quickly." "I did not wish to let the opportunity slip away through delay," he admitted. "Talent such as yours deserves swift cultivation, not cautious hesitation. If Mrs. Ellison agrees that your voice merits proper training, I am prepared to fund your instruction personally, without condition or expectation beyond your own success." The generosity of the offer left Alina momentarily speechless. She had spent 3 years believing her mother's gift had died with her, that whatever musical talent she possessed herself was destined to remain hidden, useful only for quiet moments alone in her small room where no one could hear and judge. Now, within the space of 2 days, an entirely different future was unfolding before her, one she had never dared imagine. "I do not know how to thank you, Your Grace," she said finally. "You need not thank me at all. Simply sing as beautifully as you did that night, and allow the world to hear what I heard." Their conversation continued for another hour, easy and warm despite the vast difference in their circumstances, and Alina found herself, for the first time in longer than she could remember, genuinely laughing, forgetting for a while the careful caution she had learned to maintain around anyone with power over her fate. It was only as she prepared to leave that the Duke's expression grew more serious. "Miss Whitmore, I must ask you something, and I hope you will forgive my directness. Your aunt mentioned, briefly, before you departed the ball, something about your family's history that troubled her. Do you know what she meant?" Alina's stomach tightened. "I do not, Your Grace." She would not explain further. The Duke's brow furrowed slightly. "I ask only because Frederick, my friend, has taken it upon himself to make certain inquiries, out of concern for my reputation, he claims. I would rather hear whatever truth exists directly from you than allow rumor and speculation to shape my understanding." Alina felt a cold thread of anxiety twist through her chest. "I know nothing to hide, Your Grace. My father's business failed and we lost everything. My mother was ill for several years before her death. There is nothing more to our story than misfortune as far as I have ever known." "Then I will trust your word over whatever whispers may circulate," the Duke said, though something in his expression suggested the matter was not entirely settled in his own mind. Alina returned home that evening with hope and unease tangled together in equal measure, uncertain which feeling would ultimately prove stronger. She did not have long to wonder. 3 days later, while Alina was hanging laundry in the small yard behind the house, Margaret appeared with a folded newspaper clutched in her hand, her expression triumphant in a way that made Alina's stomach drop before her cousin even spoke. "You should read this," Margaret said, thrusting the paper toward her. "Mother thought you should see it before the entire county does." Alina took the paper with trembling hands and found, beneath a small headline about local society events, a brief item mentioning the Duke's unusual attention toward a young woman at his recent ball, followed by a pointed suggestion that the woman in question came from a family with a scandalous past, one involving accusations of fraud against her late father, details that had never before been publicly known. "This is not true," Alina said, her voice shaking. "My father's business failed. There was no fraud." "Are you certain?" Margaret asked, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "Because Mother has documents, Alina, letters from creditors, records from the investigation that followed your father's death. It seems your beloved father was rather more dishonest than you ever knew, and now the entire county will know it too." Alina felt the ground shift beneath her, the careful world she had built around her father's memory crumbling into something unrecognizable. How did this reach the newspaper? Margaret's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Mother has connections of her own, cousin. She thought it only fair that the Duke understand exactly what kind of family he has chosen to associate himself with before matters progress any further. Surely you understand. We could not allow him to remain ignorant of such important information." Alina stared at her cousin, understanding dawning with sickening clarity. Aunt Constance had manufactured or exaggerated some hidden scandal, true or false, and deliberately released it to public knowledge, timed precisely to destroy whatever fragile future Alina had begun building with the Duke's support. Whether the accusations held any truth at all seemed almost beside the point. The damage, once printed, would be nearly impossible to undo. "Why would you do this?" Alina whispered. "What have I ever done to deserve such cruelty from you?" For just a moment, something flickered across Margaret's face, something that might have been genuine discomfort, quickly smothered beneath practiced coldness. "You exist, Alina. That has always been enough. Mother has spent years arranging my prospects carefully, and I will not allow some accident of fate at a ball to unravel everything simply because you happened to sing prettily one evening. Nothing more." Margaret turned and walked back into the house, leaving Alina standing alone in the yard, the damning newspaper clutched in her trembling hands, laundry forgotten on the line beside her. She read the item again, searching for some detail she might dispute, some clear falsehood she could point to and disprove, but the accusations were vague enough to avoid outright libel while still casting devastating suspicion over her family's name. She thought immediately of the Duke, of how quickly such news would reach him, of Frederick's earlier warnings about scandal and suspicion. Would he believe such rumors? Would his newfound interest in her voice, in her, survive contact with accusations of fraud and dishonesty attached to her father's memory? Alina did not wait to find out through second-hand rumor. That very afternoon, without informing her aunt or cousin of her intentions, she walked the long distance to Ashcombe Hall alone, newspaper clutched tightly in her hand, determined to confront whatever damage had been done directly, rather than allow it to fester unanswered. She was shown into the same sitting room as before, though this time the Duke's expression when he entered carried none of its previous warmth. Instead, she found him troubled, his brow furrowed with obvious concern. "Miss Whitmore, I was about to send for you. Have you seen this?" He gestured toward a copy of the same newspaper resting on a side table. "I have, Your Grace. That is why I came." "Is it true?" he asked, his voice careful, neutral, giving nothing away of his own judgment. "Was your father involved in fraudulent dealings?" Alina met his gaze steadily, despite the fear churning in her stomach. "I do not know, Your Grace, and that is the honest truth. I was only 11 years old when my father died. I knew nothing of the details of his business affairs, only that everything collapsed suddenly and left my mother and me with nothing. If there were accusations of wrongdoing at the time, they were never spoken of within my hearing." "Your aunt claims to possess documentation," the Duke said slowly. "My aunt," Alina said, her voice hardening despite her best efforts at composure, "arranged for this story to reach the newspaper the very same week you began showing me kindness, Your Grace. Whatever documents she possesses, real or fabricated, she has chosen this precise moment to reveal them, not out of concern for truth, but out of determination to destroy whatever opportunity has come to me through your generosity." The Duke studied her closely, and Alina forced herself to hold his gaze, refusing to look away despite the weight of judgment she felt pressing upon her. Several long moments passed in silence before he finally spoke again. "I believe you," he said quietly. Relief flooded through Alina so suddenly that she felt momentarily lightheaded. "You do?" "I have known your aunt and cousin only briefly, Miss Whitmore, but I have observed enough of their character in that short time to recognize calculated cruelty when I see its results. A woman capable of publicly humiliating her own niece for entertainment is entirely capable of manufacturing scandal to protect her own interests." His expression softened slightly. "Though I confess, this complicates matters considerably. Whether the accusations are true or false, the damage to public perception has already begun, and such things are notoriously difficult to fully undo. I understand if this changes your willingness to help me, Your Grace," Alina said quietly, bracing herself for disappointment even as she spoke the words. "I would not wish to draw scandal toward your own name through association with mine." The Duke rose from his chair and crossed to stand before the window, his back to her for a long moment before he turned around, his expression resolved in a way that surprised her. "I have spent my entire life, Miss Whitmore, surrounded by people who calculate every action for social advantage, who smile pleasantly while plotting behind closed doors, who value reputation above genuine character. Watching you sing that night and speaking with you these past days, I have found something entirely different, something I did not realize I had been missing until I encountered it. I am not inclined to abandon that discovery simply because your aunt has chosen dishonorable tactics to protect her daughter's prospects." Alina felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, tears of relief and gratitude she had not expected to feel after the fear and humiliation of the morning. "Thank you, Your Grace." "Do not thank me yet," he said, a faint, determined smile touching his lips. "We have considerable work ahead of us if we intend to counter this scandal properly, and your aunt strikes me as the sort of woman who will not accept a single setback gracefully. I suspect this newspaper item is merely her opening move, not her final one." Alina thought of Margaret's sharp smile in the yard that morning, of Aunt Constance's cold, calculating expression in the carriage after the ball, and understood with sudden and sobering clarity that the Duke's assessment was almost certainly correct. Whatever battle had begun between herself and her own family, it was far from finished, and the coming weeks would test not only her fragile new hope, but her very courage to continue fighting for it. "Then we had better prepare ourselves, Your Grace," she said, straightening her shoulders with newfound resolve. "Because I do not intend to let my aunt's cruelty determine the course of my life any longer." The Duke's answering smile carried genuine warmth, and something else beneath it, something like admiration mixed with quiet determination of his own. "Nor do I intend to let it determine mine, Miss Whitmore. We shall face whatever comes together." Outside, the afternoon light had begun to soften toward evening, casting long golden shadows across the gardens, and neither of them noticed, in that moment of shared resolve, the carriage that had paused briefly at the edge of the Duke's property, nor the sharp, watchful eyes of Aunt Constance observing the house from a discreet distance, already planning her next and far more dangerous move. Aunt Constance did not confront Alina that evening, nor the following morning, and the silence unsettled Alina far more than open anger would have. She moved through the household performing her usual duties, waiting for the blow she knew was coming, until finally, 3 days after the newspaper item appeared, her aunt summoned her to the small parlor where important family matters were traditionally discussed. "You went to Ashcombe Hall without my permission," Aunt Constance said without preamble, seated stiffly in her favorite chair near the cold fireplace. "You defied my authority in my own household." "I went to defend my father's name, Aunt," Alina replied, standing straight despite the familiar urge to shrink under her aunt's cold scrutiny. "Something I would have thought you might understand, given how fiercely you protect your own family's reputation." Aunt Constance's eyes narrowed at the pointed remark, but she said nothing directly in response. Instead, she folded her hands in her lap with deliberate calm. "I have decided that your presence in this household has become disruptive, Alina. The scandal surrounding your father's memory, however you wish to characterize its origins, reflects poorly upon this family, and your continued closeness with the Duke only invites further public scrutiny that Margaret cannot afford, given her own delicate marriage prospects." Alina's heart began to pound. "What are you suggesting, Aunt?" "I have written to your father's cousin in Yorkshire, a Mrs. Harriet Bellamy. She has agreed to take you in, provided you make yourself useful in her household. You will depart within the fortnight." The word struck Alina like a physical blow. Yorkshire was nearly 200 miles away, a journey of several days by carriage, far beyond any reasonable distance for continued visits to Ashcombe Hall, far beyond the reach of whatever fragile opportunity the Duke's patronage had begun to offer her. "You cannot mean this," Alina said, her voice unsteady. "Aunt, please, I have finally found a chance at something better than a lifetime of servitude in this house. Do not take it from me now." "I mean it entirely," Aunt Constance said, her expression utterly without sympathy. "This is not merely about Margaret's prospects, Alina, though those matter a great deal to me. It is about propriety. A duke does not court a poor relation with a scandalous family history, not seriously, not with honorable intentions. Whatever attention he has shown you will fade within the season, and you will be left with nothing but a ruined reputation and no family willing to shelter you. I am doing you a kindness by removing you from this situation before it destroys you entirely." Alina wanted desperately to believe her aunt's words were nothing more than manipulation, another calculated cruelty disguised as concern, and yet a small, fearful part of her wondered if there might be truth buried within them. She had known the Duke for less than a week. What if Aunt Constance was correct, and his interest truly would fade, leaving Alina with nothing but scandal and no home to return to? She pushed the doubt aside with effort, remembering the sincerity in the Duke's dark eyes, the resolve in his voice when he had promised to face whatever came together. Whatever else her aunt might be, Alina did not believe the Duke capable of such shallow cruelty. "I will not go to Yorkshire," she said finally, surprising herself with the steadiness of her own voice. Aunt Constance's expression darkened. "You have no choice in the matter, Alina. You are unmarried, without independent means, entirely dependent upon my charity for shelter and sustenance. I could put you out on the street this very afternoon if I chose, and no one in this county would question my right to do so, given the circumstances." The threat hung in the air, cold and absolute, and Alina felt the full weight of her precarious position settle over her like a physical burden. Whatever courage she had found in recent days felt suddenly fragile against the reality of her circumstances. She had no money of her own, no property, no legal standing to refuse her aunt's demands. But she also had, for the first time in years, somewhere else she might turn. "Then I will inform the Duke of your decision," Alina said quietly, "and allow him to determine whether he wishes to intervene on my behalf." Something flickered across Aunt Constance's face, quickly suppressed, but Alina had seen it clearly enough to recognize uncertainty beneath her aunt's confident facade. Whatever calculations her aunt had made regarding the Duke's likely response to Alina's removal, she had not fully accounted for the possibility that he might actually care enough to intervene directly. "Do as you wish," Aunt Constance said finally, though her voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. "But do not expect a duke to trouble himself over the domestic arrangements of a poor relation he has known for less than a week. Men of his standing rarely involve themselves in such matters, regardless of momentary infatuation." Alina left the parlor without responding further, her mind already working through how best to reach the Duke before her aunt could finalize arrangements for her departure. She did not have to wait long for opportunity, however, for that very afternoon, a note arrived from Ashcombe Hall requesting her presence the following morning, as Mrs. Ellison, the singing instructor from London, had arrived earlier than expected and wished to hear Alina perform without delay. Alina arrived at the appointed hour the next morning, her nerves stretched taut with the dual pressures of the impending audition, and her aunt's threat of exile hanging over everything else. She was shown into the Duke's music room, an elegant space dominated by a magnificent pianoforte, where a striking older woman with silver-streaked dark hair and sharp, assessing eyes rose to greet her. "Miss Whitmore, I presume," the woman said, her voice carrying the crisp precision of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "I am Margaret Ellison. The Duke speaks very highly of your abilities, though I have learned to be cautious of such enthusiastic recommendations. Shall we discover together whether his praise is warranted?" Alina glanced toward the Duke, seated quietly near the window, offering her an encouraging smile that steadied some of her nervousness. "I am ready, Mrs. Ellison, whenever you wish to begin." Mrs. Ellison seated herself at the pianoforte and played a series of scales, instructing Alina to follow along, testing the range and control of her voice with clinical precision that revealed nothing of her opinion. She moved through increasingly complex exercises, watching Alina's face and posture as closely as she listened to the sounds she produced, and Alina found herself growing steadily more confident as the assessment continued, drawing upon reserves of skill she had not fully recognized in herself until this moment of careful scrutiny. Finally, Mrs. Ellison asked her to sing something of her own choosing, without accompaniment, and Alina chose once again the song her mother had loved, allowing herself to sink fully into the melody, forgetting for those few precious minutes the looming threat of Yorkshire, the calculating cruelty of her aunt and cousin, everything except the pure joy of the music itself. When she finished, Mrs. Ellison remained silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable before finally speaking. "Your technique is entirely untrained, Miss Whitmore. Your breath control needs significant work, and your upper register, while lovely, lacks the discipline necessary for true operatic performance." Alina's heart sank, disappointment washing through her despite her attempts to remain composed. However, Mrs. Ellison continued, a faint smile finally touching her stern features, I have trained perhaps a dozen singers in my career who possessed better technique than what I have just witnessed, and not one of them possessed what you have, Miss Whitmore. There is something in your voice that cannot be taught, an emotional truth that moves people regardless of technical polish. With proper training, disciplined and consistent, I believe you could become one of the finest performers in London within 2 years, perhaps less. Relief and joy flooded through Alina in equal measure, and she glanced toward the Duke, finding his own expression bright with obvious satisfaction at Mrs. Ellison's assessment. I told you, did I not? He said, rising from his chair. Mrs. Ellison, will you accept Miss Whitmore as your student? I will, provided the arrangements suit us both, Mrs. Ellison said. I maintain a residence in London where I house and train my most promising students. If Miss Whitmore is willing to relocate there, I can begin proper instruction within the fortnight. The word fortnight struck Alina with sudden, painful irony, given her aunt's identical timeline for exile to Yorkshire. She hesitated, uncertain how to explain her precarious domestic situation without appearing to burden the Duke further with her family troubles. Miss Whitmore, the Duke said, watching her expression carefully, is something troubling you? Alina took a steadying breath. My aunt has decided to send me to a distant relative in Yorkshire, Your Grace. Within the same time frame, Mrs. Ellison proposes for relocating to London. She believes it improper for me to continue associating with your household, given the recent scandal and given Margaret's own marriage prospects. The Duke's expression darkened immediately, though his voice remained carefully controlled. She intends to remove you entirely from any opportunity for training, then, to bury this matter permanently. I believe so, Your Grace. He was silent for a moment, clearly working through the implications, before turning to Mrs. Ellison with sudden decisiveness. Would your household in London be an acceptable and entirely proper residence for Miss Whitmore, free from any question of impropriety? Entirely proper, Mrs. Ellison confirmed. I house 3 other young women currently under my instruction, along with a respectable housekeeper who maintains strict standards of conduct. No young lady's reputation has ever suffered from residing under my roof, Your Grace, and several have gone on to make excellent marriages precisely because of the refined training and respectable connections they gained during their time with me. Then the solution seems clear enough, the Duke said, turning back to Alina with renewed determination. If your aunt insists upon sending you away regardless of your wishes, let her send you to London instead of Yorkshire. I will personally fund your relocation and training under Mrs. Ellison's supervision, and no reasonable person could argue impropriety in a young woman pursuing proper musical instruction under such respectable circumstances. Alina felt hope surge through her chest, quickly followed by renewed caution. My aunt will never agree to such an arrangement, Your Grace. She specifically wishes to separate me from your influence. Then we shall have to convince her otherwise, the Duke said, or find alternative means of securing your independence from her authority altogether. Mrs. Ellison, watching this exchange with evident interest, cleared her throat delicately. If I may offer a suggestion, Your Grace. Miss Whitmore's aunt holds legal authority over her only so long as Miss Whitmore remains unmarried and without independent income. Should Miss Whitmore secure a position, even a modest one, that provides her own means of support, her aunt's authority over her domestic arrangements would become considerably weaker. A position such as what? Alina asked. I frequently hire promising students as assistant instructors for my younger pupils, in exchange for room, board, and a small wage, while they continue their own advanced training. It is entirely respectable employment, and would grant you sufficient independence to make your own decisions regarding where and with whom you reside. The Duke's expression brightened considerably at this suggestion. That seems an elegant solution indeed. Miss Whitmore, would such an arrangement suit you?" Alina considered the proposal carefully, turning over every angle of what independence, real independence, might mean for her future. No longer entirely dependent upon her aunt's charity or subject to her cousin's cruelty. A chance to develop her voice under proper instruction, to build something entirely her own, separate from the precarious uncertainty of the Duke's romantic interest, which, however sincere it currently felt, remained unpredictable in its ultimate outcome given the vast difference in their social standing. "It would suit me very well, Mrs. Ellison," Alina said finally. "I accept your offer with gratitude." "Excellent," Mrs. Ellison said, rising from the pianoforte with brisk satisfaction. "Then let us begin making the necessary arrangements immediately. Your aunt may object to losing her Duke's attention toward you, Miss Whitmore, but she can hardly object to a respectable position of employment that removes any question of impropriety from the situation entirely." As they discussed logistics and timing, Alina allowed herself, cautiously, to imagine a future entirely different from anything she had believed possible only a week earlier. Independence, proper training, a chance to build a life defined by her own talent and effort rather than her family's charity or cruelty. It felt almost too fragile and precious to fully trust, and yet, watching the Duke's evident satisfaction at having found a solution that protected both her reputation and her opportunity, Alina felt something warm and hopeful settle firmly into place within her chest, stronger than the fear that had gripped her only hours earlier. She did not yet know how fiercely her aunt would fight against even this carefully respectable arrangement, nor how much further Margaret's jealousy would drive her before the matter was finally settled. But for the first time since her father's death had thrown her small world into chaos, Alina Whitmore felt something resembling genuine control over her own future, and she intended to hold onto that feeling with everything she had. Alina returned home that evening prepared for a difficult confrontation, but she had not anticipated quite how far her aunt would go to prevent the arrangement from proceeding. Aunt Constance listened to Alina's explanation of the position with Mrs. Ellison in stony silence, her expression giving away nothing until Alina finished speaking entirely. "You believe this changes anything," Aunt Constance said finally, her voice deceptively calm. "You believe a position teaching scales to wealthy little girls grants you independence from this family." "It grants me my own income, Aunt, and respectable lodging under Mrs. Ellison's supervision. Legally, I understand that changes my situation considerably." "Legally, perhaps," Aunt Constance agreed. "But there are other considerations beyond mere legality, Alina. I have already begun arrangements for your future that you know nothing about, arrangements considerably more advantageous than teaching music to children in London." Alina felt a fresh wave of unease at her aunt's words. "What arrangements, Aunt?" Aunt Constance's lips curved into a thin, satisfied smile. "Mr. Barnaby Croft has expressed considerable interest in making you his wife, Alina. He is a man of substantial means, a widower with 2 young children in need of a mother's guidance, and he has agreed, despite the recent scandal surrounding your father's memory, to overlook such unfortunate circumstances in exchange for a suitable dowry, which I have agreed to provide from what remains of your father's estate." The words struck Alina like a blow. She had encountered Mr. Croft on several occasions at local gatherings, a heavyset man some 20 years her senior, known throughout the county for his harsh treatment of servants and his quick temper when crossed. The thought of marrying him, of placing herself entirely under his authority for the remainder of her life, filled her with a dread more visceral than anything Yorkshire had inspired. "I will not marry Mr. Croft," Alina said, her voice trembling despite her attempt at firmness. "You have very little say in the matter," Aunt Constance replied coolly. "As your guardian, I retain the legal right to arrange your marriage until you reach the age of 25, or until you secure independent means sufficient to support yourself entirely without assistance. Your modest teaching position, I am afraid, falls considerably short of such independence." Mrs. Ellison provides room and board along with wages, Alina protested. That constitutes independent support. A technicality I intend to challenge, should the matter come before proper authorities, Aunt Constance said. Marriage to Mr. Croft, on the other hand, would settle the question entirely and permanently, removing any ambiguity about your future circumstances, and conveniently removing you from any further association with the Duke that might complicate Margaret's own prospects. Alina stared at her aunt, understanding now the full scope of the trap being constructed around her. This was no longer merely about spite or cruelty for its own sake, but a calculated maneuver designed to eliminate every possible avenue of escape Alina might pursue, forcing her into a marriage that would benefit her aunt financially while permanently severing any connection to the Duke and his growing influence over her future. "When have you arranged for this marriage to take place?" Alina asked, dread pooling in her stomach. "Mr. Croft is eager to proceed quickly, given his need for a mother for his children. I have suggested a fortnight from Sunday would be appropriate, allowing sufficient time for the necessary arrangements without unnecessary delay." A fortnight, the same time frame as her planned relocation to London under Mrs. Ellison's guidance. Alina understood immediately that her aunt intended these competing plans to collide directly, forcing a resolution before Alina could establish the independence necessary to refuse the marriage entirely. She did not sleep that night, her mind racing through every possible course of action, every argument she might raise, every ally she might turn to for assistance. By morning, she had reached only one clear conclusion. She needed to speak with the Duke immediately, and she needed legal guidance regarding her aunt's actual authority over her circumstances, guidance she had no idea how to obtain without resources of her own. She arrived at Ashcombe Hall shortly after breakfast, having walked the considerable distance alone rather than wait for proper transportation, her desperation overriding usual concerns about propriety. The Duke received her immediately upon hearing of her arrival, his expression shifting to alarm at the evident distress written across her features. "Miss Whitmore, what has happened?" Alina explained the situation in halting, anxious sentences. Watching the Duke's expression darken with each detail she provided regarding Mr. Croft's reputation, her aunt's legal authority, and the deliberately compressed timeline designed to force the marriage before any alternative arrangement could be finalized. "This is monstrous," the Duke said when she finished, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Your aunt would sell you into misery for the sake of financial gain and petty spite toward your relationship with myself. I do not know how to stop her, Your Grace. I have no legal standing to refuse, and no resources of my own to establish independence quickly enough to prevent this marriage." The Duke was quiet for a long moment, pacing before the window with obvious agitation, before finally turning back toward her with renewed resolve. "There is a solicitor in London, a man named Charles Whitfield, who has handled legal matters for my family for many years. I will write to him immediately, requesting his urgent assessment of your aunt's actual legal authority in this matter. Guardianship laws are complex, but they are not without limits, particularly when a guardian's motivations can be shown to serve her own interests rather than her ward's welfare. Even if such limits exist, Your Grace, proving them within a fortnight seems an impossible task." "Then we shall have to move quickly," he said. "In the meantime, I will not allow you to return to your aunt's household tonight, given the very real danger that she might attempt to force this marriage through more immediate and coercive means once she learns you have sought my assistance directly." Alina's eyes widened at the implication. "You believe she might act so quickly, Your Grace?" "I believe your aunt has already demonstrated considerable willingness to employ underhanded tactics to achieve her aims," he said grimly. "I do not intend to underestimate her further. I will send word to Mrs. Ellison immediately, requesting she receive you into her household today, ahead of the originally planned schedule. Whatever legal questions remain regarding your aunt's authority, physical distance, and Mrs. Ellison's respectable reputation should provide at least some measure of protection while Mr. Whitfield investigates the matter properly. Within hours, arrangements had been made, and Alina found herself in a carriage bound for London that very afternoon, her few possessions hastily gathered, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and desperate hope as the familiar countryside gave way to unfamiliar roads leading toward a city she had never before visited. She had left no formal explanation for her aunt, trusting the Duke's judgment that swift, unannounced departure offered better protection than any attempt at diplomatic negotiation. Mrs. Ellison's London residence proved to be a tall, elegant townhouse in a respectable neighborhood, considerably more modest than Ashcombe Hall but comfortable and welcoming in ways Alina had rarely experienced within her aunt's household. She was introduced to the other 3 young women currently residing there, all similarly engaged in musical training, and shown to a small but pleasant room that would become her own for however long the arrangement lasted. "You are safe here, Miss Whitmore," Mrs. Ellison assured her that first evening, settling into a comfortable chair in her private study, while Alina perched nervously on the edge of a nearby seat. "I have hosted young women fleeing considerably worse domestic circumstances than the ones you describe, and I do not intend to allow your aunt or her unpleasant marriage candidate to disrupt the peace of my household." "I am deeply grateful, Mrs. Ellison, though I confess I remain uncertain how this situation will ultimately resolve. My aunt retains legal authority over me, regardless of the physical distance now separating us." "Legal authority has its limits, particularly when properly challenged," Mrs. Ellison said. "The Duke's solicitor is among the finest in London, and I have every confidence he will identify whatever avenues exist to protect your independence. In the meantime, you are here to train your voice, and I intend to make the most of whatever time we have together, regardless of how the legal questions eventually resolve." True to her word, Mrs. Ellison began Alina's formal training the very next morning, and Alina found herself grateful for the demanding, structured schedule that left little time for anxious speculation about her aunt's likely response to her sudden departure. Hours of vocal exercises, breathing technique, and careful study of proper posture and projection filled her days, alongside lessons in reading music and understanding the theoretical foundations of the melodies she had previously learned purely by ear from her mother. Word arrived from her aunt within a week, delivered by messenger to Mrs. Ellison's household, a furious letter demanding Alina's immediate return, threatening legal action, threatening to have her forcibly removed, and return to complete the arranged marriage to Mr. Croft regardless of her wishes. Mrs. Ellison read the letter with obvious distaste before passing it to Alina. "Your aunt possesses more spite than sense," she observed dryly. "Threatening legal action before consulting a solicitor of her own regarding whether such action would actually succeed seems a poor strategic choice, though I suppose desperate people rarely think clearly." Alina read the letter with trembling hands, her earlier fear returning in full force despite the relative safety of Mrs. Ellison's household. What if she succeeds, Mrs. Ellison? What if the law truly does grant her the authority to force this marriage regardless of my wishes or my current employment? "Then we shall face that outcome when and if it arrives," Mrs. Ellison said firmly, "but I do not intend to allow speculation and fear to disrupt your training in the meantime. Come, back to the pianoforte. Worry accomplishes nothing that proper preparation cannot accomplish considerably better." Alina forced herself to return to her lessons, though the letter's threatening words lingered in her mind throughout the following days. The Duke visited twice during that first fortnight, each time bringing updates from his solicitor regarding the slow, careful process of establishing legal grounds to challenge Aunt Constance's authority, and each time offering quiet reassurance and steady support that helped ease some of Alina's persistent anxiety. "Mr. Whitfield believes we have strong grounds," the Duke told her during his second visit, seated across from her in Mrs. Ellison's small parlor while the older woman discreetly occupied herself elsewhere to allow them privacy. Your aunt's clear financial motivation in arranging the marriage to Mr. Croft, combined with documented evidence of her prior cruelty toward you, particularly the incident at the ball, provides substantial basis for challenging her fitness as your guardian. Additionally, your current respectable employment under Mrs. Ellison's supervision, along with the modest income it provides, offers reasonable grounds to argue you have achieved sufficient independence to make your own decisions regarding marriage. How long will such a legal challenge take, Your Grace? Weeks potentially rather than days, he admitted. Legal matters rarely move as quickly as we might wish, particularly when properly and carefully constructed to withstand challenge. Alina felt a fresh wave of anxiety at the timeline, though she trusted the Duke's judgment regarding the necessity of thorough preparation. And in the meantime, Your Grace, what if my aunt attempts something more drastic than angry letters? The Duke's expression grew serious. I have taken the liberty of arranging additional protection for Mrs. Ellison's household, discreetly, of course. A man in my employ will maintain watch over the property, ensuring no attempt to forcibly remove you succeeds without proper legal authority clearly established first. The revelation that the Duke had gone to such lengths on her behalf, arranging protection, funding legal challenges, disrupting his own social schedule to visit and reassure her personally, filled Alina with an emotion far more complex than simple gratitude. She studied his face across the small distance separating them, noting the genuine concern etched into his features, the quiet determination that had characterized every interaction between them since that first extraordinary night at the ball. "Why do you do all this for me, Your Grace?" she asked quietly. "I have brought you nothing but scandal and difficulty since the moment we met." The Duke was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch slightly. "Because I have spent my entire adult life surrounded by people who see me as a title, a fortune, a strategic marriage prospect to be pursued for advantage. You, Miss Whitmore, have never once looked at me that way. From the very first moment, you have simply been honest, courageous, and remarkably resilient in the face of circumstances that would have broken many people far less determined than yourself. I find myself, quite unexpectedly, unwilling to stand aside and allow such qualities to be destroyed by your aunt's cruelty and greed." Alina felt heat rise in her cheeks and something warmer still bloom in her chest at his words. "That is a very generous assessment of my character, Your Grace, given how frightened and uncertain I feel most of the time. Courage is not the absence of fear, Miss Whitmore. It is choosing to act rightly despite it. I have watched you do exactly that repeatedly since the moment your cousin pushed you onto that stage." He reached forward, hesitating only briefly before taking her hand gently in his own. "Whatever comes of the legal challenge, whatever your aunt attempts next, I want you to know that I do not intend to abandon you to face it alone." Alina's fingers curled slightly around his, the warmth of his touch steadying something anxious and uncertain within her chest. "Thank you, Your Grace. I do not know how I would face any of this without your support." "You would find a way," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "I have no doubt of that whatsoever. But I am grateful nonetheless that you do not have to." Outside the small parlor window, London's evening traffic moved past in its endless, indifferent rhythm, entirely unaware of the quiet, significant moment passing between the Duke of Ashcombe and the poor relation whose voice had captured his attention so completely only a few short weeks earlier. Neither of them could have predicted, in that peaceful moment, exactly how dramatically and dangerously the coming days would test the fragile bond growing steadily between them. The attempt came on a rainy evening some 10 days after the Duke's visit, while Alina sat with the other young women in Mrs. Ellison's parlor, practicing harmonies by candlelight. A sudden commotion at the front entrance interrupted their music, raised voices, and the sound of the housekeeper's alarmed protests carrying clearly through the closed parlor doors. "Stay here," Mrs. Ellison instructed firmly, rising immediately and moving toward the disturbance with a composure that belied the tension evident in her tightened shoulders. Alina's heart pounded as she strained to make out the words being exchanged in the entrance hall. She recognized, with growing horror, the deep, blustering voice of Mr. Barnaby Croft himself, accompanied by what sounded like 2 additional men, demanding entry and insisting upon Alina's immediate return to complete arrangements that had, in his words, already been legally settled. "You have no authority to remove anyone from this household," Mrs. Ellison's voice rang out, sharp and unyielding. "Miss Whitmore is a resident here under proper employment, and you will leave immediately or I shall summon the constables." "Her aunt has granted full authority for her retrieval," Mr. Croft's voice boomed back. "The marriage contract has been signed, and I do not intend to be made a fool of by some music teacher sheltering another man's intended bride." Alina rose from her seat, trembling, unable to remain passively hidden while chaos unfolded in the entrance hall on her behalf. She moved toward the parlor door despite the other young women's alarmed protests, determined to face whatever confrontation awaited rather than cower helplessly while others fought her battles. She arrived in the entrance hall to find Mrs. Ellison standing firm before the open doorway, blocking Mr. Croft's considerable bulk from entering further into the house, while 2 rough-looking men lingered behind him in the rain-soaked street, clearly prepared to assist with whatever forceful removal their employer intended. "There you are," Mr. Croft said upon spotting Alina, his small eyes narrowing with satisfaction. "Come now, Miss Whitmore, let us not make this unpleasant. Your aunt has arranged everything properly, and continued resistance only delays the inevitable." "I have signed no marriage contract, Mr. Croft," Alina said, forcing steadiness into her voice despite the fear coursing through her. "Nor do I intend to. Whatever arrangement my aunt has made exists entirely without my consent." "Your consent is hardly required, given your aunt's legal authority as your guardian," Mr. Croft replied, his tone hardening. "Now, I have been more than patient thus far, but my patience has limits. You will come with me now quietly, or these men will assist in making the process considerably less pleasant." The threat, delivered with blunt casualness, sent a fresh wave of fear through Alina, but before she could respond, the sound of an approaching carriage drew everyone's attention toward the street, where a familiar dark vehicle bearing the Ashcombe crest was pulling to a rapid stop before the house. The Duke emerged before the carriage had fully halted, along with a tall, serious-looking man Alina did not recognize, whom she assumed must be the solicitor Mr. Whitfield. "Mr. Croft," the Duke said, his voice carrying an authority that immediately shifted the tenor of the confrontation, "I would advise you to remove yourself from this property immediately." Mr. Croft's confidence faltered visibly at the Duke's sudden appearance, though he attempted to maintain his blustering posture. "Your Grace, this matter does not concern you. Miss Whitmore's marriage arrangements were properly settled by her legal guardian, and I am merely collecting my intended bride as agreed. Mr. Whitfield here has spent the past several days establishing precisely the opposite," the Duke replied coolly. "He carries with him a court order, obtained just this afternoon, formally challenging Mrs. Constance Whitmore's fitness to serve as Miss Whitmore's guardian, on grounds of demonstrated financial self-interest and documented cruelty toward her ward. Until that matter is properly resolved before a magistrate, any marriage contract signed on Miss Whitmore's behalf carries no legal validity whatsoever." Mr. Whitfield stepped forward, producing a formal document that he held out for Mr. Croft's inspection, though the heavyset man made no move to actually examine it closely, his face reddening with a mixture of embarrassment and frustrated anger. "This is absurd," Mr. Croft sputtered. "I have already paid a considerable dowry in advance of the ceremony." "Then I would suggest," Mr. Whitfield said dryly, "that you direct your grievances toward Mrs. Whitmore regarding the return of those funds, rather than attempting the forcible removal of a young woman who has clearly and repeatedly stated her refusal of the marriage in question. Such actions, I should mention, carry serious legal consequences of their own. The two rough men accompanying Mr. Croft exchanged uneasy glances, clearly reconsidering their willingness to participate in whatever forceful action their employer had originally intended, now that legal authority and the obvious presence of the Duke himself complicated matters considerably. Mr. Croft, sensing the shift in his companion's resolve, glared once more at Alina before finally stepping back from the doorway. "This is not finished," he growled, though the threat carried considerably less weight than his earlier bluster. "Your aunt will hear of this interference, Your Grace, and I do not believe the courts will look kindly upon a duke's improper involvement in another family's private affairs." "I welcome any scrutiny the courts wish to apply," the Duke replied evenly. "I suspect they will find considerably more concern regarding an attempted forced marriage and the intimidation tactics employed this evening than in my own actions on Miss Whitmore's behalf." Mr. Croft retreated to the street, muttering angrily to his companions, and within moments the small group had disappeared into the rainy darkness, leaving Alina standing in the doorway, trembling with the aftermath of fear and adrenaline, watching the Duke turn back toward her with evident relief written across his features. "Are you unharmed?" he asked, moving quickly to her side. "I am, thanks to your timely arrival," Alina said, her voice still unsteady. "I confess I did not expect matters to escalate so dramatically." "Nor did I, though perhaps I should have anticipated it, given your aunt's demonstrated willingness toward drastic measures." He guided her gently back into the warmth of the entrance hall, where Mrs. Ellison and Mr. Whitfield were already discussing the legal implications of the evening's confrontation in low, urgent tones. "This incident will certainly strengthen our case before the magistrate," Mr. Whitfield was saying. "Attempted forcible removal, combined with clear evidence of coercion regarding the marriage contract, provides exactly the kind of documented misconduct necessary to establish grounds for revoking Mrs. Whitmore's guardianship entirely." "When will the matter come before the magistrate?" Alina asked, gathering her composure sufficiently to engage with the practical details now that immediate danger had passed. "I have already requested an expedited hearing, given tonight's events," Mr. Whitfield replied. "I anticipate we shall have a resolution within the fortnight, perhaps sooner." Relief flooded through Alina at the prospect of a definitive end to the uncertainty that had shadowed her days since her aunt's initial threats. She glanced toward the Duke, finding his expression still tight with residual concern despite the successful resolution of the immediate crisis. "You came the moment word reached you," she observed quietly, once Mrs. Ellison and Mr. Whitfield had withdrawn to discuss further legal strategy, leaving them a rare moment of relative privacy near the parlor entrance. "I had arranged for immediate notification should any disturbance occur at this household," the Duke admitted. "I confess I did not truly expect your aunt or Mr. Croft to attempt something so brazen, though perhaps I underestimated the desperation that financial motivation and wounded pride can inspire." "I am deeply grateful, Your Grace. I do not know what might have happened had you not arrived when you did." The Duke's expression grew serious, something vulnerable flickering briefly across his usually composed features. "The thought of what might have happened, had I arrived even minutes later, is not one I care to dwell upon, Miss Whitmore. I confess this evening has clarified something for me that I have been reluctant to fully acknowledge these past weeks." Alina's breath caught slightly at the shift in his tone. "What has it clarified, Your Grace?" "That my concern for your welfare extends considerably beyond simple admiration for your talent, or even sympathy for your difficult circumstances." He reached for her hand once more, his grip warm and steady despite the lingering tension from the evening's confrontation. "I find myself thinking of you constantly, Miss Whitmore, worrying for your safety, hoping for your happiness, in ways that exceed what I would consider appropriate for mere patronage or casual acquaintance." Alina felt her pulse quicken, hardly daring to interpret his words as she desperately hoped she might. "Your Grace, I am uncertain what you mean to say." "I mean," he said, his dark eyes holding her steadily, "that I have come to care for you, Alina, quite beyond what propriety or social expectation would normally permit, and this evening's events have made clear to me that I am unwilling to continue pretending otherwise, regardless of how complicated our circumstances remain." The use of her given name, spoken with such quiet sincerity, sent warmth spreading through Alina's chest despite the exhaustion and residual fear from the evening's confrontation. She studied his face, searching for any hesitation, any hint of the calculation or expectation she had learned to fear from those with power over her circumstances, and found none. "I care for you as well, Your Grace," she admitted softly. "Far more than I have allowed myself to acknowledge, given the impossible distance between our respective stations." "Perhaps that distance is not quite so impossible as it appears," he said, a faint, hopeful smile touching his lips. "Though I recognize we have considerably more urgent matters to resolve first, before we can properly consider what future might exist between us." Alina nodded, though the warmth of his words lingered pleasantly despite the practical wisdom of his caution. "The magistrate's hearing and my aunt's guardianship." "Precisely. Let us see that matter properly resolved, and ensure your safety and independence beyond any question of doubt, before we allow ourselves to consider what comes next." As Alina finally retired to her room that night, her mind buzzing with the dramatic events of the evening and the Duke's unexpected declaration, she found herself unable to fully suppress a growing, fragile hope that perhaps, despite every obstacle her aunt and cousin had thrown before her, something genuinely wonderful might yet emerge from the chaos that had upended her life since that fateful night at the ball. Yet even as hope bloomed within her, a cautious voice reminded her that her aunt, having failed so publicly and dramatically this evening, would not simply retreat quietly. Whatever came next, Alina suspected, would test her resolve and courage more severely than anything she had yet faced. The magistrate's hearing took place on a gray, overcast morning in a modest but formal chamber near the center of London, far removed from the grandeur of Ashcombe Hall or the comfortable warmth of Mrs. Ellison's parlor. Alina sat beside Mr. Whitfield at a long wooden table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to still their trembling, while across the narrow aisle, Aunt Constance sat rigid and furious beside her own hastily retained solicitor, Margaret seated just behind her mother with an expression Alina could not quite read. The magistrate, an elderly man with sharp, observant eyes and a reputation for careful impartiality, according to Mr. Whitfield's earlier reassurances, called the proceedings to order with brisk efficiency, outlining the matter before him. A petition to revoke Mrs. Constance Whitmore's guardianship over her niece, Miss Alina Whitmore, on grounds of demonstrated misconduct and self-interested motivation contrary to the ward's welfare. Mr. Whitfield presented his case methodically, beginning with the incident at the ball, where Margaret had publicly humiliated Alina for what he characterized as deliberate cruelty rather than harmless jest, before moving to the newspaper scandal regarding Alina's father, which Mr. Whitfield revealed, through documentation obtained during his investigation, had been substantially exaggerated and misrepresented by Aunt Constance herself, who possessed no genuine evidence of fraud beyond her own son-in-law's failed business relationship with Alina's late father decades earlier. "The true records," Mr. Whitfield explained, presenting documents to the magistrate, "show that Mr. Charles Whitmore's business failed due to unfortunate economic circumstances beyond his control, specifically the collapse of several key trading partnerships during a period of considerable market instability. There exists no formal investigation, no charges, no legal finding whatsoever of fraudulent conduct. The accusation printed in the newspaper originated entirely from Mrs. Whitmore's own private correspondence with the publication's editor, a Mr. Aldous Fenwick, who happens to be a distant cousin of her late husband." A murmur passed through the small gathering of observers at this revelation, and Alina watched Aunt Constance's face pale slightly, though she maintained her rigid composure. "Furthermore," Mr. Whitfield continued. I have obtained testimony from 3 household servants previously employed within Mrs. Whitmore's residence, each willing to attest to a consistent pattern of harsh treatment toward Miss Whitmore over the past 3 years, including denial of adequate provisions, excessive domestic labor disproportionate to her station within the household, and repeated verbal cruelty documented in letters exchanged between the servants and family members no longer in Mrs. Whitmore's employ. The magistrate's expression remained carefully neutral throughout this presentation, though his sharp eyes moved frequently between Mr. Whitfield's evidence and Aunt Constance's increasingly tense posture. When Mr. Whitfield finally concluded his presentation with the events of the attempted forced marriage and the confrontation at Mrs. Ellison's residence, complete with sworn statements from Mrs. Ellison herself and 2 of the young women who had witnessed the incident, the magistrate called upon Aunt Constance's solicitor to respond. The response, when it came, proved considerably weaker than the confident opposition Alina had feared. Aunt Constance's solicitor attempted to characterize the guardianship arrangement as appropriate exercise of parental authority, the marriage arrangement as a reasonable attempt to secure Alina's future given her precarious financial circumstances, and the ball incident as nothing more than an unfortunate misunderstanding blown disproportionately out of scale by subsequent events. But the arguments carried little conviction, and Alina could see, watching the magistrate's expression, that they were failing to overcome the weight of documented evidence Mr. Whitfield had presented. Finally, the magistrate called for a brief recess before rendering his decision, and Alina found herself alone with Aunt Constance and Margaret in the narrow corridor outside the chamber, their respective solicitors having withdrawn briefly to discuss final matters elsewhere. You have destroyed this family's reputation for the sake of your own selfish ambitions, Aunt Constance hissed, her composed facade finally cracking under the strain of the morning's proceedings. Everything I did to protect this family's standing, to secure Margaret's future prospects, and you have repaid 3 years of my charity with public humiliation before the entire county. Charity, Alina repeated quietly, something hardening within her that had not been present during previous confrontations with her aunt. You call 3 years of servitude and cruelty charity, Aunt. You attempted to force me into marriage with a man I despise, purely for financial gain and to remove any threat I posed to Margaret's own prospects. That is not charity. That is exploitation. Aunt Constance's face flushed with anger, but before she could respond further, Margaret stepped forward unexpectedly, her expression conflicted in a way Alina had rarely witnessed from her cousin. Mother, Margaret said quietly, perhaps we should simply accept whatever the magistrate decides and move forward from here. Do not tell me how to manage this situation, Margaret, Aunt Constance snapped, though something in her daughter's tone seemed to give her momentary pause. I only mean, Margaret continued, her voice growing steadier despite her mother's obvious displeasure, that Lord Pembroke has already withdrawn his interest in courting me, given the scandal surrounding this entire affair. Whatever additional damage continued fighting might cause, it seems unlikely to restore what has already been lost. The mention of Lord Pembroke's withdrawal struck Alina with unexpected sympathy for her cousin, despite everything Margaret had done to harm her. She recognized, suddenly, that Margaret's cruelty had never truly originated from personal malice toward Alina specifically, but from desperate fear instilled by her mother's relentless focus on securing an advantageous marriage as the sole measure of Margaret's worth and future security. Margaret, Alina said quietly, surprising herself with the genuine compassion in her own voice, I am sorry for whatever difficulties this situation has caused you, even as I cannot forgive the cruelty you and your mother have shown me these past weeks. Margaret's eyes met Alina's for a long moment, something raw and uncertain flickering across her features before she looked away, unable or unwilling to offer any direct apology, though her earlier hostility seemed to have drained away, leaving something more complicated in its place. The magistrate's return interrupted whatever further exchange might have followed, and the small group filed back into the formal chamber to hear his decision. Alina's heart pounded as the elderly man settled behind his desk, reviewing his notes one final time before finally speaking. Having carefully considered the evidence presented this morning, the magistrate began, his voice carrying clearly through the quiet chamber, I find substantial and compelling grounds to conclude that Mrs. Constance Whitmore has acted in a manner contrary to her ward's welfare, motivated significantly by financial self-interest, and a demonstrated pattern of cruelty inconsistent with proper guardianship. The attempted forced marriage to Mr. Barnaby Croft, in particular, represents a serious and troubling abuse of guardianship authority that this court cannot allow to stand unchallenged. Alina felt Mr. Whitfield's hand rest briefly on her shoulder, a quiet gesture of reassurance, as the magistrate continued. I therefore order the immediate revocation of Mrs. Constance Whitmore's guardianship over Miss Alina Whitmore. Given Miss Whitmore's demonstrated independent income through respectable employment, and given her age and evident capability to manage her own affairs responsibly, I further find no need to appoint alternative guardianship, granting Miss Whitmore full legal independence to determine her own residence, employment, and personal affairs going forward, without interference from Mrs. Whitmore or any other party. The words washed over Alina like a physical wave of relief, so profound that she felt momentarily lightheaded. Independence. Full legal independence, free from her aunt's authority, free from the looming threat of forced marriage, free to build whatever future she chose for herself, guided by her own judgment rather than the calculated cruelty of relatives who had never truly valued her beyond what use they could extract from her circumstances. Beside her, Aunt Constance sat in stunned, furious silence, her earlier confidence entirely collapsed beneath the magistrate's decisive ruling. Alina did not look toward her aunt as the proceedings concluded, focusing instead on Mr. Whitfield's quiet words of congratulation, and the warm, relieved smile Mrs. Ellison offered from where she had waited throughout the hearing in the small gallery reserved for observers. Outside the chamber, as the small crowd dispersed into the gray London morning, Alina found the Duke waiting near the entrance, having deliberately absented himself from the formal proceedings to avoid any appearance of improper influence over the magistrate's decision, though his anxious expression made clear how closely he had been awaiting news of the outcome. Well, he asked, searching her face for any sign of the verdict. Independence, Alina said, unable to fully suppress the wide, genuine smile spreading across her features for the first time in what felt like weeks. Full legal independence, Your Grace. My aunt's guardianship has been entirely revoked. The Duke's answering smile matched her own in its genuine warmth, and without regard for the propriety typically expected in a public street, he reached forward and drew her into a brief, joyful embrace, careless of the curious glances from passers-by. Then we have won, he said softly, close enough that only she could hear his words clearly. Whatever comes next, Alina, we have won this particular battle, and I do not intend to let anything diminish this victory. Alina allowed herself, for the first time since that fateful night at the ball, to fully believe that the nightmare of her aunt's cruelty and manipulation had finally, truly ended, and that whatever future awaited her now belonged entirely to her own choosing. She did not yet know how quickly new challenges would arise, nor how thoroughly her budding relationship with the Duke would soon be tested by forces far beyond her aunt's diminished influence. But for this one bright, triumphant morning, standing free and independent for the first time in her adult life, Alina allowed herself simply to celebrate the victory she had fought so hard to achieve. The weeks following the magistrate's decision brought Alina a measure of peace she had almost forgotten was possible. Free from her aunt's authority and the constant anxiety of impending marriage or exile, she threw herself fully into her training under Mrs. Ellison's demanding but genuinely caring instruction, her voice growing steadily stronger and more disciplined with each passing day. The Duke visited regularly, their friendship deepening into something neither of them bothered to disguise any longer. Though both remained careful to observe proper conduct given the considerable scrutiny, their connection continued to attract from London society. It was during one such visit, some 6 weeks after the hearing, that the Duke arrived at Mrs. Ellison's residence with an expression considerably more troubled than his usual warm greeting suggested. "Is something wrong, Your Grace?" Alina asked, noting the tension in his shoulders as they settled into their now familiar seats near the parlor window. "My mother has arrived in London," he said, his tone carefully neutral in a way that immediately signaled deeper concern. "She has heard, through various channels I am certain originated with disappointed society matrons hoping to secure me for their own daughters, considerable rumor regarding my attention toward you." Alina felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach, and she disapproves, I assume. "She has not yet met you, so I would not characterize her feelings as settled disapproval," the Duke said carefully. "But she has expressed considerable concern regarding the implications of a Duke of Ashcombe forming a serious attachment to a young woman of your circumstances, however unfair such concerns might be given your evident character and talent." "What circumstances does she find so troubling, Your Grace?" "My poverty, or the scandal my aunt manufactured regarding my father." "Both, I suspect, though she has been careful to frame her concerns primarily around questions of family duty and the expectations placed upon a duke's marriage, rather than personal judgment of your character specifically." He reached across the small distance separating them, taking her hand gently. "I do not wish you to worry excessively, Alina. My mother's opinion, while I value it considerably, does not ultimately determine my own choices regarding my future or my heart. But I would be dishonest if I claimed her concerns carried no weight whatsoever within our family's circumstances." Alina absorbed this information with a sinking feeling, recognizing immediately the scope of this new obstacle. Her aunt's cruelty and manipulation, however painful, had at least been comprehensible, motivated by clear self-interest that could be legally challenged and ultimately overcome. The Dowager Duchess's concerns, rooted in genuine questions of duty, tradition, and family expectation, promised to prove considerably more complicated to navigate. "Does she wish to meet me?" Alina asked finally. "She has requested exactly that, actually, though I confess I have delayed arranging it, uncertain how best to approach the introduction given her current state of concern." "Perhaps delay serves neither of us well, Your Grace," Alina said, gathering her courage despite the anxiety churning within her. "If your mother's approval matters for whatever future we might share, it seems wisest to face her concerns directly rather than allow them to fester through continued avoidance." The Duke studied her for a long moment, admiration evident in his expression despite the difficult circumstances they discussed. "You continue to surprise me with your courage, Alina. Very well. I will arrange a meeting if you are certain you wish to proceed." The meeting took place 3 days later, in a formal drawing room within the Duke's London townhouse, considerably grander than Mrs. Ellison's comfortable but modest parlor. Alina had dressed with particular care, choosing a simple but elegant gown that Mrs. Ellison had helped her select specifically for this purpose, understanding intuitively the delicate balance required between appearing appropriately humble regarding her circumstances, while avoiding any impression of false modesty that might read as manipulative performance rather than genuine character. The Dowager Duchess proved to be a tall, elegant woman with silver hair, arranged in an elaborate style that spoke of decades of careful attention to appearance and presentation, her sharp eyes assessing Alina with a thoroughness that made Alina distinctly aware of every detail of her own appearance and bearing. "Miss Whitmore," the Dowager Duchess said, her voice cool but not overtly hostile, "my son has spoken of you at considerable length these past weeks." "I hope favorably, Your Grace," Alina said, curtsying with the proper formality Mrs. Ellison had drilled into her during hasty preparation for this meeting. "Favorably enough to concern me considerably," the Dowager Duchess replied, settling into an elegant chair and gesturing for Alina to take the seat opposite her own, while the Duke remained standing near the window, watching the exchange with evident tension. "You must understand, Miss Whitmore, that my son's position carries considerable responsibility beyond his own personal happiness. The Duke of Ashcombe's marriage affects not only his own future, but the standing and prosperity of our entire family, our tenants, our extended household. Such matters cannot be decided purely through romantic sentiment, however genuine that sentiment might feel in the moment." "I understand your concerns, Your Grace," Alina said carefully, "though I would gently suggest that character and genuine devotion matter considerably in a marriage's ultimate success, regardless of the parties' respective social standing at its outset." The Dowager Duchess's eyebrow rose slightly at Alina's direct response. "You speak with considerable confidence for someone in your position, Miss Whitmore." "I have learned, Your Grace, through difficult circumstances these past weeks, that confidence and honesty serve me considerably better than false modesty or calculated flattery. I would rather earn your respect through genuine character than attempt to win your approval through pretense." Something shifted subtly in the Dowager Duchess's expression, a flicker of grudging interest replacing her earlier cool assessment. "Tell me of your father's business and the scandal that recently appeared in the newspapers." Alina explained the situation honestly and completely, describing her father's failed business partnerships, her aunt's manufactured accusations, and the magistrate's subsequent ruling that had thoroughly vindicated both her father's memory and her own independence from her aunt's manipulative authority. The Dowager Duchess listened without interruption, her expression carefully neutral throughout the explanation. "And your musical training?" she asked when Alina finished. "My son mentions you possess considerable talent." "Mrs. Ellison believes I show promise, Your Grace, though I remain considerably early in my development as a proper performer. I hope, with continued training, to eventually perform professionally should such opportunity arise." "A professional singer," the Dowager Duchess repeated, something unreadable in her tone. "That is not typically a path pursued by young women considering marriage into the peerage, Miss Whitmore." Alina felt her chest tighten at the implicit challenge in the Dowager Duchess's words, but she held her composure, meeting the older woman's gaze steadily. "Forgive me, Your Grace, but I have not presumed any particular outcome regarding marriage. Your son has shown me remarkable kindness and support during an exceptionally difficult period in my life. Kindness I value deeply regardless of whatever future our relationship ultimately holds. Whatever happens between us, I do not intend to abandon the musical training that has given me both purpose and independence these past weeks. It is not merely a pleasant hobby to me, Your Grace. It represents the truest expression of who I am, a gift inherited from my mother, and the foundation of whatever future I intend to build for myself, married or otherwise." The Dowager Duchess studied Alina in prolonged silence, and Alina forced herself to remain still and composed under the weight of that scrutiny, refusing to fill the silence with nervous chatter or unnecessary justification. Finally, the older woman spoke again, her tone shifting subtly toward something less guarded. "You remind me somewhat of myself, Miss Whitmore, at a similarly difficult juncture in my own youth, though our circumstances differ considerably in their particulars." She glanced briefly toward her son, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, watching with evident anxiety. "I married beneath what my own family considered appropriate expectation, Edmund's father having been a younger son with modest prospects before an unexpected series of family deaths elevated him unexpectedly to the dukedom. My own mother expressed concerns not entirely dissimilar to those I have voiced today, and I confess, looking back, that her worries proved largely unfounded." Alina felt a flicker of cautious hope at this unexpected admission. "Then perhaps, Your Grace, you understand better than most how genuine character can overcome whatever obstacles circumstance initially presents." "Perhaps," the Dowager Duchess allowed, though her tone remained measured rather than fully convinced. "I will not pretend my concerns have entirely vanished, Miss Whitmore, nor will I offer premature blessing to a relationship that remains, as far as I understand, still relatively undefined in its ultimate intentions. But I will admit that you have conducted yourself with considerably more grace and honesty than the rumors circulating through London society suggested I should expect." It was not full approval, Alina recognized, but it represented a meaningful shift from the cool hostility with which the meeting had begun, and she allowed herself a small measure of relief as the Dowager Duchess rose to signal the conclusion of their conversation. "I would like to hear you sing sometime, Miss Whitmore," the Dowager Duchess said unexpectedly, as Alina prepared to take her leave. "My son speaks of your voice with such evident admiration that I confess considerable curiosity regarding whether it truly merits such praise. I would be honored, Your Grace, whenever such opportunity might arise." As Alina departed the townhouse a short while later, the Duke escorting her personally to her waiting carriage, she felt a complicated mixture of relief and lingering anxiety regarding the encounter's true outcome. "That went considerably better than I feared," the Duke said quietly, once they stood alone near the carriage, safely beyond his mother's hearing. "Better than I feared as well, Your Grace, though I would not yet characterize your mother as fully persuaded." "No," he agreed, "but she is rarely persuaded quickly regarding anything of significance. The fact that she has expressed interest in hearing you sing represents considerable progress, I assure you. My mother does not extend such invitations casually." Alina allowed herself to hope, cautiously, that perhaps this new obstacle, unlike her aunt's outright cruelty, might eventually be overcome through patience, honesty, and continued demonstration of genuine character, rather than through legal battles or dramatic confrontation. Yet even as this fragile hope took root, she remained acutely aware that London society's scrutiny extended far beyond the Dowager Duchess's private concerns, and that public opinion regarding her unusual connection to the Duke remained volatile, subject to whatever fresh scandal or rumor might next capture society's fickle and often merciless attention. She did not have long to wait before discovering exactly how quickly that fragile peace could once again be threatened. Lady Cordelia Pemberton had, for the better part of 2 years, considered herself the most likely candidate to eventually become the next Duchess of Ashcombe. Beautiful, well-connected, possessed of a substantial dowry and impeccable lineage, she had watched with growing fury as the Duke's attention shifted so completely toward an impoverished nobody, whose only claim to notice was a pretty voice and an unfortunate talent for generating scandal wherever she went. When word reached her, through her extensive network of society connections, that the Dowager Duchess had actually granted Alina Whitmore a private audience, Lady Pemberton decided the time for patient waiting had definitively ended. She arrived at the grand townhouse of Lady Winterbourne, hostess of what promised to be the most significant musical evening of the London season, with a carefully constructed plan already taking shape in her calculating mind. The evening would feature several accomplished young performers, including, she had learned with considerable displeasure, Alina Whitmore herself, whom the Duke had apparently arranged to have included specifically to showcase her developing talent before a wider society audience. Lady Pemberton found her opportunity during the reception preceding the performances, approaching a small cluster of prominent society matrons with practiced casualness. "Have you heard the latest regarding Miss Whitmore?" she asked, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry to nearby ears without appearing deliberately provocative. "I understand from a reliable source that her relationship with the Duke extends rather further than mere musical patronage would suggest. There have been visits, quite frequent ones, entirely unchaperoned, to Mrs. Ellison's residence at hours considerably later than propriety would typically permit." The suggestion, delivered with careful ambiguity that avoided outright accusation while still planting the poisonous seed of scandal, spread through the assembled crowd with remarkable speed, as such rumors invariably did within London's tightly interconnected social circles. By the time Alina arrived, accompanied by Mrs. Ellison, she found herself greeted with a considerably cooler reception than the warm curiosity that had characterized previous public appearances, since the magistrate's decision had restored her reputation. "Something has changed," Alina murmured to Mrs. Ellison as they made their way through the crowded reception room, noting the whispered conversations and pointed glances following their progress. "I sense it as well," Mrs. Ellison replied, her expression troubled. "Let us hope it proves nothing more than momentary curiosity." But the whispers only intensified as the evening progressed, and Alina caught fragments of conversation that made her stomach twist with familiar dread. Words like unchaperoned and improper hours reached her ears repeatedly, and she noticed several matrons who had previously greeted her warmly now maintaining careful distance, their expressions guarded rather than friendly. The Duke arrived shortly before the performances were scheduled to begin, and Alina watched his expression shift from pleasant anticipation to controlled concern as he too began registering the changed atmosphere within the reception room. He found her near the edge of the gathering, his voice low with worry. "What has happened, Alina? The mood has shifted considerably since I arrived." "I do not know precisely, Your Grace, though I have overheard suggestions regarding impropriety in our meetings, implications that our visits have been unchaperoned and conducted at improper hours." Alina's voice carried genuine confusion mixed with growing anxiety. "I do not understand the origin of such claims. Mrs. Ellison has always been present during your visits, and we have never met beyond entirely respectable daytime hours." The Duke's jaw tightened with obvious anger. Someone has deliberately fabricated this rumor, then, and timed its release specifically to coincide with tonight's performance, when you would be most publicly visible and vulnerable to its damaging effects. Before Alina could respond, Lady Pemberton herself approached, her expression carefully arranged into false sympathy that fooled neither Alina nor the Duke regarding its true purpose. "Miss Whitmore, Your Grace," she said smoothly, "I do hope these unfortunate rumors have not caused you undue distress. I am certain, whatever their origin, reasonable people will eventually see through such baseless gossip." "Lady Pemberton," the Duke said, his voice carrying a controlled edge that Alina had rarely heard from him previously, "I find it curious that you would raise the matter of these rumors so pointedly, given that I have not yet mentioned their content to you directly." Lady Pemberton's composure flickered almost imperceptibly, quickly recovered. "The entire room speaks of little else this evening, Your Grace. I merely wish to offer sympathy for what must be a rather uncomfortable situation for Miss Whitmore." "How generous of you," the Duke replied evenly, though his eyes remained sharp with suspicion. "Perhaps you might also share the identity of whoever originated this particular rumor, since you seem so thoroughly informed regarding its circulation throughout the room." "I am afraid I could not say precisely, Your Grace," Lady Pemberton said, her smile tightening slightly. "Such things travel so quickly through society, it becomes nearly impossible to trace their origin with any certainty." She withdrew shortly after, leaving Alina and the Duke standing in tense, troubled silence amid the continuing murmur of gossip surrounding them. "She is lying," Alina said quietly, once Lady Pemberton had moved beyond hearing distance. "I am certain of it, Your Grace." "As am I," the Duke agreed grimly. "Lady Pemberton has made her interest in securing my attention plain enough these past 2 years that her motivation for spreading such damaging rumors seems obvious enough, though proving her responsibility will require considerably more than mere suspicion." The evening's performances began shortly thereafter, and Alina found herself waiting anxiously through several other young women's presentations, acutely aware of the whispered conversations continuing throughout the audience despite the ongoing music. When her own turn finally arrived, she rose with trembling composure, acutely conscious of the skeptical, judgmental atmosphere that had replaced the warm curiosity she might otherwise have expected. She chose, once again, the song her mother had loved, drawing upon the same deep well of genuine emotion that had first captured the Duke's attention months earlier, allowing herself to sink fully into the melody despite the hostile undercurrent surrounding her performance. As before, something in her voice seemed to cut through skepticism and judgment alike, the pure emotional honesty of her singing gradually silencing even the most persistent whispers as the song progressed toward its aching, beautiful conclusion. When she finished, the applause that followed carried genuine warmth, though Alina noted several guests, including Lady Pemberton herself, offering only perfunctory acknowledgement before quickly returning to whatever quiet conversations continued around the room's edges. It was during the reception, following the performances, that unexpected help arrived from a source Alina had never anticipated. "Miss Whitmore," Margaret's voice said quietly from just behind her shoulder, and Alina turned in surprise, having not realized her cousin was even present at the gathering. "Margaret," Alina said carefully, uncertain what to expect given their complicated history, "I did not know you would be attending tonight. Lady Winterbourne is a distant family connection through my late uncle," Margaret explained. "I was invited some weeks ago before everything that has happened between us." She hesitated, glancing around as though checking for eavesdroppers before continuing in a lower voice. "I overheard Lady Pemberton discussing the origin of tonight's rumors with her maid, in the retiring room, believing themselves entirely private. She fabricated the entire story herself, Alina, out of jealousy regarding the Duke's attention toward you. There is no truth whatsoever to the claims of impropriety." Alina stared at her cousin in genuine surprise. "Why are you telling me this, Margaret, after everything between us?" Margaret's expression grew complicated, guilt and uncertainty mixing with something that might have been genuine remorse. "Because whatever has happened between us, Alina, I did not fully understand, until recently, exactly how far my mother's schemes had gone, nor how genuinely you have suffered from our family's cruelty. Watching Lady Pemberton employ the very same tactics my mother once used against you, I found I could not simply stand aside and say nothing, regardless of our own difficult history. Would you be willing to state what you overheard, publicly, if necessary?" Alina asked carefully. "Such testimony could prove invaluable in countering these damaging rumors." Margaret hesitated visibly, clearly weighing the social risk of such public involvement against whatever guilt or genuine sympathy had prompted her unexpected assistance. "I will consider it," she said finally, "though I would ask something in return, Alina, if you are willing." "What do you ask?" "Forgiveness, eventually, if you find yourself capable of it. Not immediately, and not without genuine effort on my part to demonstrate changed character. But I find, watching you tonight, facing this cruelty with such grace despite everything my own family has already put you through, that I no longer wish to remain the person I have been these past years." Alina studied her cousin's face, searching for any trace of manipulation or calculation, and found instead something that appeared genuinely vulnerable and uncertain. "I cannot promise forgiveness immediately, Margaret, given how deeply your actions have wounded me, but I am willing to consider it, should you demonstrate genuine, sustained change over time." Margaret nodded, apparent relief flickering across her features. "That is more than I likely deserve, given everything." "Thank you, Alina." True to her tentative word, Margaret approached the Duke directly before the evening concluded, offering to provide formal written testimony regarding Lady Pemberton's fabrication of the evening's damaging rumors, testimony that, combined with careful investigation by Mr. Whitfield in the following days, thoroughly exposed Lady Pemberton's malicious scheme, and effectively neutralized whatever lingering damage the rumors might otherwise have caused to Alina's reputation. Lady Pemberton herself, facing mounting evidence of her deliberate fabrication and the social consequences of such exposed dishonesty, withdrew from London society for the remainder of the season, her own reputation suffering considerably more lasting damage than whatever temporary discomfort she had intended to inflict upon Alina. As the truth fully emerged and society's opinion shifted decisively back in Alina's favor, the Dowager Duchess, who had been quietly observing the entire affair with careful attention, finally extended what Alina recognized as genuine, unreserved approval. "You have weathered considerable adversity these past months, Miss Whitmore," the Dowager Duchess said during a subsequent visit, her tone considerably warmer than their initial meeting. "Cruelty from your own family, manufactured scandal, and now malicious jealousy from a rival suitor, each attempting to destroy your reputation and separate you from my son's affection. Yet you have faced each challenge with remarkable grace, honesty, and resilience, qualities I confess I did not fully anticipate finding in someone of your circumstances." "Thank you, Your Grace," Alina said, genuine warmth filling her chest at the older woman's evident sincerity. "I believe," the Dowager Duchess continued, glancing meaningfully toward her son, who stood nearby with poorly concealed hope evident in his expression, "that whatever concerns I initially harbored regarding this match have been thoroughly addressed through your own demonstrated character. You have my blessing, Miss Whitmore, should my son choose to pursue matters further." Alina felt tears prick unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of this final, crucial obstacle finally overcome. She glanced toward the Duke, finding his own expression bright with matching emotion, and understood with growing certainty that whatever remained of their journey together, they would now face it with the full support of his family, free from the shadow of scandal and manipulation that had shadowed their connection since its very beginning. 6 months passed following that pivotal evening, months during which Alina's training under Mrs. Ellison's careful guidance transformed her raw, untrained talent into something polished and genuinely remarkable. Her voice, already extraordinary in its natural emotional honesty, gained the technical discipline and controlled power necessary for true professional performance, and word of her developing talent began spreading through London's musical circles with growing enthusiasm. It was Mrs. Ellison who first proposed the idea that would eventually shape the culmination of Alina's remarkable journey. "The Royal Opera House holds an annual showcase evening," Mrs. Ellison explained one afternoon, during what had become a comfortable routine of daily training sessions. "Promising young performers are given opportunity to demonstrate their abilities before some of London's most influential musical patrons and critics. I believe, Alina, that you are ready to be considered for this year's program." Alina's heart raced at the suggestion. "Do you truly believe I am prepared for such a significant opportunity, Mrs. Ellison?" "I would not suggest it otherwise," Mrs. Ellison replied firmly. "Your technical skill has developed remarkably these past months, and your natural gift for emotional connection with an audience remains as powerful as it was the very first day I heard you sing. I believe you possess genuine potential for a significant professional career, should you choose to pursue it." The Duke, upon hearing of this opportunity, expressed immediate and enthusiastic support, though Alina noticed a certain wistfulness beneath his encouragement that puzzled her, until he finally addressed it directly during a quiet evening walk through the gardens of his London townhouse. "I confess," he admitted, as they strolled beneath trees just beginning to show the first hints of autumn color, "that I find myself experiencing rather contradictory emotions regarding your potential success at the Opera House showcase." "Contradictory how, Your Grace?" Alina asked, genuine curiosity mixing with mild concern at his uncharacteristically hesitant tone. "I am tremendously proud of your talent and dedication, and I wish nothing more than to see you achieve whatever success your gift deserves." He paused, turning to face her directly, his expression suddenly serious. "Yet I also find myself increasingly aware that a successful professional singing career and marriage to a duke exist in considerable tension with one another, given society's expectations regarding a duchess's proper role and conduct." Alina felt her chest tighten at the implicit question underlying his words. Are you suggesting, Your Grace, that I must choose between my music and any future we might share together? No, he said quickly, taking her hands in his own. That is precisely what I do not wish, Alina. I have spent considerable time these past weeks discussing the matter with my mother, and with Mr. Whitfield regarding what precedent might exist for a duchess maintaining active involvement in professional musical performance. I have found, I believe, a path forward that need not require you to sacrifice your gift for the sake of our future together, should you wish to pursue both. Alina's breath caught. What path do you propose, Your Grace? There is precedent, admittedly limited but genuine, for noblewomen maintaining artistic pursuits following marriage, particularly when such pursuits are conducted with appropriate discretion and are understood as genuine talent rather than mere social ambition. I would not ask you to perform commercially in the traditional sense, touring theaters and accepting payment as Mrs. Ellison's other students typically do, but private performances, carefully selected charitable benefit concerts, perhaps occasional appearances at significant cultural events, all of these remain entirely within the bounds of acceptable conduct for a duchess who happens to possess extraordinary musical talent. You have given this considerable thought, Alina observed softly, moved by the evident care he had invested in finding a solution that honored both her ambitions and whatever future they might build together. I have thought of little else these past weeks, he admitted. Because I intend, Alina, to ask you a question I have wished to ask for considerably longer than propriety has permitted me to voice it, and I did not wish to ask it while any doubt remained regarding whether marriage to me would require you to abandon the very gift that first brought us together. Alina's heart pounded as she watched him lower himself onto one knee before her, right there among the autumn-touched gardens, his expression carrying the same quiet sincerity that had characterized every significant moment of their remarkable journey together since that fateful night at the ball. Alina Whitmore, he said, his voice steady despite the evident emotion underlying his words. From the very moment I heard you sing, humiliated and frightened though you were, forced onto that platform by cruelty you did not deserve, I recognized something extraordinary within you, a strength and honesty and genuine goodness that I have found nowhere else in all my years navigating London society. You have faced every obstacle placed before you, your aunt's manipulation, Mr. Croft's coercion, Lady Pemberton's malicious scheming, with courage and grace that has only deepened my admiration and affection for you with each passing month. I love you, Alina, entirely and without reservation, and I wish to spend the remainder of my life supporting your dreams exactly as fiercely as I hope you might support mine. Will you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife? Tears streamed freely down Alina's face as she looked down at the man kneeling before her, the very Duke whose attention had transformed her entire existence from one of quiet desperation and cruel humiliation into something she had never dared imagine possible for herself. Yes, she whispered, then repeated more firmly as joy overwhelmed whatever remaining hesitation might have lingered. Yes, Edmund. I will marry you. He rose swiftly, drawing her into an embrace that spoke more eloquently than any words could manage of the profound relief and happiness flooding through them both. And as autumn leaves drifted gently around them in the quiet garden, Alina allowed herself, finally and completely, to believe that the extraordinary transformation her life had undergone since that terrible, wonderful night at the ball represented not merely a temporary escape from cruelty, but the genuine beginning of a future built on love, mutual respect, and unwavering support for each other's dreams. News of their engagement spread through London society with predictable speed, and while a few voices, echoing Lady Pemberton's earlier malicious rumors, attempted to suggest impropriety or calculated ambition on Alina's part, the overwhelming response proved remarkably warm and supportive, particularly once the Dowager Duchess made her own enthusiastic blessing publicly known, effectively silencing whatever lingering skepticism remained among the more conservative elements of society. Mrs. Ellison, upon hearing the news, embraced Alina with unusual warmth for someone typically so composed and professionally reserved. "I could not be more delighted, Alina, though I confess selfish disappointment at potentially losing my most promising student to matrimonial duties." "You need not worry on that account, Mrs. Ellison," Alina assured her, explaining the Duke's thoughtful arrangement regarding her continued musical pursuits following marriage. "I intend to continue training under your guidance for as long as you will have me as your student, and to pursue whatever performance opportunities remain compatible with my future responsibilities." The Opera House Showcase, when it finally arrived some weeks after Alina's engagement had been announced, carried added significance beyond mere professional evaluation. It would represent, Alina understood, her first major public performance since her engagement, an opportunity to demonstrate to all of London society that her extraordinary talent remained genuine and worthy of recognition, regardless of her impending elevation to Duchess of Ashcombe. The evening arrived clear and cool, the Grand Opera House filled to capacity with London's most influential musical patrons, critics, and society figures, all eager to witness the showcase of promising young talent that had become one of the season's most anticipated cultural events. Alina waited backstage, her nerves stretched taut despite months of preparation, watching through a narrow gap in the heavy curtains as other performers completed their presentations to varying degrees of audience appreciation. "You are ready for this," Mrs. Ellison said firmly, adjusting a final detail of Alina's elegant gown backstage. "Remember everything we have practiced, but do not forget, above all else, to sing from your heart exactly as you did that very first night. Technical perfection matters, Alina, but it is that genuine emotional truth that first captured the Duke's attention, and it remains the foundation of whatever success you achieve tonight." When her turn finally arrived, Alina walked onto the grand stage with a composure that surprised even herself, gazing out at the vast audience filling the ornate hall before her, the Duke seated prominently near the front alongside his mother, both watching with evident pride and anticipation. Somewhere in the audience, she knew, Mrs. Ellison's other students had gathered to offer their support, and she had received, just that morning, an unexpected note of encouragement from Margaret, who had continued, over the preceding months, to demonstrate genuine change through consistent kindness and support that had gradually, cautiously, begun rebuilding trust between the once estranged cousins. Alina had chosen, for this significant performance, a piece considerably more complex and demanding than the simple song she had sung that first night at the ball, a challenging aria that would properly showcase the technical growth Mrs. Ellison had cultivated in her voice over the preceding months, while still allowing space for the genuine emotional expression that remained her singular gift. As the orchestra began the opening measures, Alina closed her eyes briefly, drawing upon the same well of feeling that had guided her through every significant performance of her remarkable journey, and began to sing. Her voice filled the grand hall with a power and clarity that silenced even the faintest whispers among the audience, rising and falling through the demanding melody with technical precision that would have satisfied even the most exacting critic, while never losing the raw emotional authenticity that had first captured attention in a very different ballroom months earlier. The aria built toward its dramatic climax, and Alina poured every ounce of her considerable skill and genuine passion into the final, soaring notes, holding the audience in complete, rapt silence until the very last sustained tone finally faded into the vast, echoing space of the concert hall. The silence that followed lasted only a moment before the entire audience rose as one, applause thundering through the grand space with an intensity that brought fresh tears to Alina's eyes as she stood, overwhelmed, upon the stage that had witnessed her complete transformation from frightened, humiliated poor relation into a performer capable of commanding such genuine, enthusiastic acclaim. Critics writing of the evenings showcased the following morning singled out Alina's performance for particular praise, several noting with evident surprise that a young woman of such recent public introduction to musical circles had already achieved a level of skill and emotional power rarely witnessed even among considerably more experienced performers. Word of her triumph spread quickly through London society, and Alina found herself, in the days following the showcase, receiving invitations and requests for performance that exceeded anything she could have imagined possible only a year earlier, when she had been nothing more than an overlooked, mistreated poor relation hidden away in her aunt's household. The wedding, when it finally took place some months later, brought together nearly everyone who had played significant roles throughout Alina's remarkable journey. Mrs. Ellison served as an honored guest, her evident pride visible throughout the ceremony. Margaret attended as well, her presence a testament to the genuine, sustained change she had demonstrated over the preceding months, and Alina found herself, in a private moment before the ceremony began, extending the forgiveness she had once withheld, recognizing in her cousin's evident remorse and consistent kindness the genuine transformation of character she had cautiously hoped might eventually emerge. Aunt Constance did not attend the wedding, having withdrawn from London society entirely following the magistrate's ruling and the subsequent collapse of whatever social standing she had once possessed. Alina felt, upon reflecting on her aunt's absence, not vindictive satisfaction, but rather a quiet, sad acknowledgement of how thoroughly her aunt's own cruelty and manipulation had ultimately cost her everything she had originally hoped to protect through such calculated schemes. Mr. Croft, too, faded from Alina's story entirely, his attempted forced marriage having become something of a minor scandal in its own right, sufficient to discourage other families from considering him a suitable match for their own daughters, a consequence Alina felt was entirely appropriate given his willing participation in her aunt's coercive schemes. As Alina stood at the altar, gazing into the eyes of the man who had first recognized her extraordinary voice amid the cruelty of that fateful ball, she found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. From frightened humiliation to genuine triumph, from powerless dependence to hard-won independence, from a family that valued her only for what use they could extract from her circumstances, to a partnership built on genuine love, mutual respect, and unwavering support for each other's dreams and ambitions. The Duke, soon to become fully her husband in every sense that mattered, smiled at her with an expression carrying all the warmth and admiration that had characterized their relationship from its very earliest, unlikely beginning, and Alina smiled back, allowing herself, completely and without reservation, to embrace the extraordinary happiness that had emerged from what had once seemed like her darkest, most humiliating moment. Their wedding celebration that evening featured, at Alina's own insistence, a performance from the bride herself, a final gift to her assembled guests before formally becoming Duchess of Ashcombe. She chose, for this most significant occasion, the same song her mother had loved, the very melody that had first transformed a moment of intended cruelty into the beginning of an extraordinary new chapter in her life. As her voice filled the grand ballroom, the very same room where her cousin had once pushed her forward hoping to witness her humiliation, Alina felt her mother's presence keenly, grateful beyond measure for the gift she had inherited, and for the courage that gift had ultimately given her to face every obstacle placed before her with grace, resilience, and unwavering hope. The applause that followed her performance carried none of the mocking anticipation that had once surrounded her that very first, terrifying night. Instead, it swelled with genuine warmth and admiration from guests who had witnessed, over the preceding months, Alina's remarkable transformation from mocked poor relation into a woman whose talent, courage, and character had earned her not merely a duke's love, but the genuine respect of everyone fortunate enough to witness her extraordinary journey. As the celebration continued late into the evening, Alina found a quiet moment alone with her new husband near the same tall windows overlooking the moonlit gardens where their story had truly begun months earlier. She rested her head against his shoulder, feeling his arm wrap securely around her, and allowed herself a final, contented reflection on everything that had brought them to this remarkable moment. "Do you remember," she asked softly, "how frightened I was that first night, standing on that small platform, certain I was about to face the worst humiliation of my life?" "I remember," he said, pressing a gentle kiss against her hair. "I remember thinking, the moment you began to sing, that I had never witnessed anything so genuinely extraordinary in all my years attending countless balls and gatherings throughout this very ballroom. Cruelty tried to break me that night," Alina reflected, "and instead it revealed something I did not even know I possessed." "Your mother's gift," the Duke said softly, "and your own remarkable strength of character. Both were always within you, Alina. That terrible night simply provided the circumstance that finally allowed the world to witness what had been there all along." As midnight approached and the celebration finally began winding toward its natural conclusion, Alina Whitmore, now the Duchess of Ashcombe, allowed herself one final, grateful thought for the mother whose voice had guided her through every dark moment of her remarkable journey, whose gift had ultimately transformed cruelty and humiliation into the foundation for a lifetime of genuine happiness, mutual love, and hard-won independence that she would carry forward with pride and gratitude for the remainder of her extraordinary life. The story that had begun with mockery and forced humiliation on a ballroom platform had, through courage, resilience, and the extraordinary power of genuine talent honestly expressed, transformed into something far more remarkable than anyone present that fateful night could have possibly imagined. Alina's voice, once nearly silenced by poverty and cruelty, had ultimately found not just an audience, but a partner who valued it in her exactly as she was, and together they looked forward to whatever remarkable future still awaited them, confident that whatever challenges arose, they would face them together, with the same courage and unwavering love that had carried them through every obstacle their unlikely journey had already presented.